Welcome back to Harry's Verse. Today's story asks, what if Harry Potter was chosen by death to unmake the Dark Lord forever? Before we go any further, do take a moment to smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a single story. Alright, let's begin. Chapter 1, The Veil and the Voice. The room at the bottom of the Department of Mysteries had no honest floor. There were tiers of stone stepping down toward a pit, and in the pit stood a dais, and on the dais rose an archway older than the ministry that had built its cellars around it. A tattered curtain hung in that arch. There was no wind in the chamber, and still the curtain moved, breathing in and out against nothing, and if a person stood close enough they could hear the murmur of it, a low tide of voices that spoke just under the threshold of sense. Harry had stopped hearing the spells. That was the strange thing about it afterward, when he tried to lay them in its end to end. The battle had been all noise, jets of light crossing the dark, Neville's wand snapped, Hermione crumpled and silent on the steps, the shatter of the shelved prophecies like a hail of glass beads underfoot. Then Sirius had come laughing down the tiers with his wand out and his coat flaring, alive in a way that made the whole grim place look painted, and for a handful of heartbeats the two of them had fought back to back as if the world were a thing that could still be won. Bellatrix Lestrange danced when she killed. Her second jet of light took Sirius in the chest, not much of a flash, an almost gentle red, and he was already falling backward when the surprise arrived on his face. He had time to look at Harry. He had time and used it, and what was in his eyes was not fear. The archway took him. He went through the curtain the way a swimmer slips beneath a surface without a splash, and the veil settled behind him, and where there had been a man there was only the slow breathing of the cloth and the murmur that lived in it. Harry heard his own voice go up the tiers ahead of him. He did not remember deciding to run. Lupin's arms came around his chest, an iron band, a voice saying his name into his hair, saying there was nothing he could do, saying he was gone. Harry, he's gone. And Harry fought the arms because the arms were wrong, because Sirius had only fallen behind the curtain, and a curtain was a thing you could pull aside. He tore loose. 3 steps forward down the last tier onto the dais, and the murmur behind the veil rose to meet him, a sound that had been waiting, the whole chamber built into a mouth, and he the word it had been shaped to say. He reached for the curtain. His fingers found it. It was cold and it was not cloth, and the moment he closed his hand on it the chamber went out like a snuffed lamp. There was no falling, there was no floor to fall from. Harry stood in a place that had unlearned the habit of having edges, and the noise of the battle was gone so entirely that its absence was a pressure against his ears. He turned. Behind him the veil hung in the middle of the nothing with light on its far side, a rectangle of the ordinary world, and through it, small and very bright, he could see the death chamber going on without him. Lupin's mouth was open. Bellatrix had her head thrown back. Everything there had slowed until it was barely moving at all, a photograph deciding whether to become a painting. They will not miss you yet, said a voice that came from every direction and from beneath the floor of his own thoughts. Time keeps different accounts on this side of the cloth. You may take what you need of it. There is a great deal that must be said, and you have never once in your short life been given time enough to hear a thing said fully. Harry turned again, and this time he was not alone. It is difficult to say what he saw, because the seeing did not happen in the ordinary way, where light strikes a thing and the thing is simply there. What stood before him assembled itself out of his own capacity to bear it, and so it wore many aspects at once and never settled long on any. There was a figure tall past the point where height stops being a comfort, wrapped in a darkness that had weight ingrained to it like the inside of a folded wing. There was a suggestion of a face that his eye kept sliding off, the way the eye slides off the sun. There were hands, or the memory of hands, long and pale and perfectly still, and around all of it there was a stillness so vast and so patient that Harry understood without being told that he was looking at the oldest thing that had ever agreed to be looked at. He knew what it was. Some knowledge arrives without the interval of learning. He knew it the way a newborn knows to close its fist around a finger. Your death, Harry said. His voice did not shake. He noticed that it did not shake, and the noticing was its own kind of unsteadiness. You took him, you just took Sirius. No, the word held no offense in it, only correction, the way a tide corrects a footprint. I take nothing, I am the shore that everything reaches. Your godfather came to me because his hour had been kept and could not be kept longer, and I received him, as I have received every soul that ever wore a body, and set it down again. I did not choose him, I do not choose. That is the whole of the difference between us, you and I, and it is the reason we are speaking. The figure inclined what might have been its head. For you I have made an exception. I have made only a handful of times since the world was young. You I have chosen. The murmur that had followed Harry through the veil pooled now around his feet, and he understood that it was not one voice but a multitude, all the dead speaking at once so quietly that no single word survived the crowd. He looked down at it, he looked back up. Where is he? Beyond the cloth, where you cannot go and keep the shape you are wearing. He is at rest. He is more at rest than he was able to be in the last 12 years of his breathing. I tell you this not to comfort you, for comfort is not a thing in my keeping, but because it is true, and you will need to know the difference between what is true and what is only kind before we are done. The pale hands moved a fraction, and the whole immensity of attention behind them fixed on Harry with a weight he felt in the roots of his teeth. There is one soul in all the turning world that has not reached my shore and will not, and it is because of that soul that you and I stand here. Do you know the name I mean? He did. He had carried the name so long it had worn a groove in him. Voldemort, Harry said. Tom Riddle, said Death, and the 2 syllables of the true name fell into the murmuring dark and silenced it, so that for a moment there was no sound in all the vastness but the word itself, cooling like struck iron. He came to me once, or nearly. 15 of your years ago in a cottage over the body of your mother, his own curse turned against him. He should have reached my shore that night. He had earned it 100 times. He did not come. Because of the Horcruxes. The word tasted of nothing Harry could name. He had learned it that year in fragments from an old memory Dumbledore had shown him, and it had sat in his chest like a swallowed stone ever since. Something moved through the great stillness then, and it took Harry a moment to name it, because he had never imagined that the oldest thing in the world could feel anything at all. It was not hot, and it was not quick, and it was nothing that would ever burn itself out. It was colder than that and far more terrible, and it had the patience of stone wearing down a mountain, and it was aimed with such precision at the absent man that Harry was glad past speaking that it was not aimed at him. He tore his soul, Death said, and he hid the pieces in the world. He learned the one art I cannot forgive, because it is the one art that is a theft from me directly. Every living thing that has ever drawn breath owes me one death and pays it, and in the paying is made whole and set free. He decided he would not pay. He butchered the one thing that was truly his, the only property a man carries out of the world, and he nailed the bleeding scraps of it to objects and to a body and to a serpent, so that when his flesh failed he would not come to my shore but would linger anchored, a splinter driven under the skin of the living world where it festers and cannot be drawn out. Do you understand what an offense that is? Yes, Harry said, and found that he did, more than he had when Dumbledore explained it. Dumbledore had spoken of Horcruxes as a horror. Death spoke of them as a debt, and a debt was a thing Harry understood in his bones, having spent his whole boyhood being reminded of what he owed the people who fed him. You understand a portion of it. The figure came no closer, and yet the space between them seemed to have thinned. Hear the rest, for it is the hinge on which everything turns. I am the shore, I do not walk inland. I have no hand that reaches into the country of the living to pluck a thing out of it. When your kind kill one another, when your kind die of years or of illness or of the small violences of chance, that is not my doing, it is only my receiving. I wait, and what is owed comes to me, and I have never once had to cross the threshold to collect it, because in all the ages until Tom Riddle no soul had ever found a way to refuse the crossing. He found the way. And so, for the first time since the making of the world, there is a debt I cannot collect, standing just out of my reach, laughing at the shore. The pale hands closed slowly into fists that were not quite fists. I cannot cross to him, but I can choose a hand that is already on his side of the threshold. I can choose one who is living and mark that one and lend that one so much of my authority that when he reaches for a stolen fragment of that soul, the fragment will know its master and will come home. Harry stood very still. The murmur had crept back around his ankles, cold as river water, and he did not move his feet. You want me to kill him, he said. No, a third time, and the correction had teeth in it now. Killing him is a small thing, and it has been tried, and it fails, because his body is the least part of him, and he has made himself able to lose it the way you or I might lose a coat. The order will kill his body, perhaps, if they are lucky, and many of them are willing to die for the luck. And he will not die. He will crawl back into another coat, because the debt is still refused, because the pieces still hang in the world holding the door open for him. I do not want him killed. I want him unmade. I want every stolen fragment given the death it was cheated of, drawn home to the shore one by one, until there is nothing of Tom Riddle anchored anywhere in the living world. And then I want the last of him, the raw remaining soul, the trunk from which he cut the branches, collected at last and closed over, so that when the world speaks of him afterward it will speak of a man who died cleanly and was gathered and is gone, not defeated, gone. As if the wound he tore in the order of things had never been torn. And you chose me, Harry said, because of the cottage, because of the cottage. A scent moved through the dark like a bell that had already finished ringing. A fragment of him lodged in you that night in the moment his curse broke against your mother's dying gift. You have carried a splinter of the very thing we mean to unmake since before you could speak. You are already half on his side of the threshold and half on mine. There is no living hand in all the world so perfectly placed. That is not a comfort. I told you I do not deal in those. It is the reason, and you are owed the reason. Harry looked at the veil hanging in the middle of the nothing, at the frozen bright rectangle of the chamber where a werewolf was caught mid-shout, arms locked around empty air. He thought about the years. He thought about the cupboard and the letters and the graveyard and Cedric folded on the ground with the surprise still on him, the same surprise that had come too late to Sirius's face. He thought about how tired he was in a way that had nothing to do with sleep, a tiredness that had started before he had words to name it and had only deepened since. There's a price, he said. It was not a question. He had learned that much about the shape of the world, that nothing came to him without a bill folded inside it. The stillness deepened, and in the deepening Harry understood that he had said the one thing that made the oldest thing in the world regard him not as an instrument but as a person. There is always a price, Death said, and for the length of those words its voice was almost gentle, which was more frightening than any of its coldness had been. I will not hide it from you, because a chosen hand that is deceived is a hand that fails at the last, when it matters, when it learns the cost too late and flinches. So hear it plainly. To unmake a fragment of a soul you must spend a portion of your own, not your life, something finer than your life and harder to grow back. Each piece of him you draw home will draw something out of you in the drawing, a warmth, a memory, a small ordinary human belonging that you will not miss until you reach for it and find the place empty. By the end, if you go to the end, you will not be able to stand fully among the living again. You will be a thing that walks between mine and part, marked and set aside, remembered by me forever and never quite at home in a lit room full of your own kind. That is the price. It is not death, it is worse and it is less, both, and I will not pretend it is anything but what it is. Harry was quiet for a while. In that place, quiet had room to be enormous. If I say no, he said, he keeps coming back. He keeps coming back. Forever, or near enough to forever that the word makes no difference to any of you who must live under him. Others will fight him. Others will die of the fighting in their thousands, in their tens of thousands, generation feeding itself into the same fire, and he will not be beaten by any of it, because the thing that would let him be beaten is a thing only my chosen can do, and I choose rarely, and I have chosen you. The pale hands opened again, palms up, offering nothing and everything. I do not compel. That is another thing I want you to carry out of this place clearly, because he compels, and you must never be confused about the difference between us. He binds, I ask. You may refuse me, and I will let you go back through the cloth with no mark on you and no memory of this, and you will live whatever life the war leaves you, be it long or short, and I will not think the less of you, for I do not think the less of anyone. Everyone reaches my shore in the end, even the ones who ran. But Sirius, Harry said, and stopped because his throat had closed on the name. Sirius is at rest. Nothing you choose here will trouble that rest or restore it. Do not choose for the dead. They are already home. Choose for the living if you choose at all. A pause, weighted and deliberate. There are a great many of the living. Harry thought of Hermione, silent on the steps, her chest still rising, still falling. He thought of Ron somewhere in the dark of the brain room with those thoughts wrapped around his arms. He thought of Neville with his broken nose and his broken wand, who had kept fighting anyway because Neville did not know how to do the sensible thing and run. He thought of every year that had ended with someone bleeding and the promise, whispered to himself in the hospital wing, that next year he would be ready, next year it would be different, next year he would not have to watch. It had never been different. He had never been ready. Ready was not a thing a schoolboy with a wand could be against a man who had refused to die. But this was not a wand. This was the shore itself offering him its authority. What do you need me to do? Harry said, and the murmur of the dead around his feet went suddenly wholly silent, the whole multitude holding a breath it did not have. Death did not answer in words. It reached out, and one pale hand came to rest above Harry's chest without touching him, and out of the darkness of it fell a cold that was not the cold of ice or of water or of any weather Harry had ever stood in. It was the cold of the space between the stars, the cold that has never once been warm, and it went into him through the skin over his heart and did not stop at the skin. He felt it find the old splinter that had lived behind his scar since the cottage, and he felt it settle around that splinter like a second thing lodged beside the first, and where they met there was a sensation he had no word for, a cold laid over an older cold, a marking, a claiming, a key turned in a lock that had been waiting his whole life to be a door. His knees did not buckle. That surprised him. Under a weight like that a body should fold, and his did not, because the weight was not pressing down on him, it was filling him, and a vessel that is being filled does not fall, it holds. He looked at his own hands. They were the same hands. The bitten nails, the scar on the back of the left one from a broom splinter in third year, the ordinary boy's hands he had always had. And under the skin of them now there was a faint sense of depth, of his hands opening onto something that went down much further than the length of his arms, down to shore he could not see, where a patient tide came in and in and in. It is done, Death said. You are mine and you are your own both, which is a contradiction that would tear anyone else in half, and which you alone in all the world are shaped to bear. When you return through the cloth, you will not feel changed at first. The mark sleeps until it is called, but you will begin to see. That is the first gift and the first burden. You will look at the world and you will see the fragments of him hanging in it, the stolen pieces glowing to your sight the way a wound glows to a healer's. You will know them when you pass near them. You will feel the pull of them and they will feel the pull of you, and neither of you will be able to pretend otherwise. Find them, one by one. And when you stand before a fragment and you are certain, reach for it with the hand I have marked and call it home, and I will do the rest. The unmaking is mine, the finding is yours, the price is ours together. How will I know I'm certain? Harry asked. How will I know it's really one of them and not just, you will know, said Death, because I will be there, I am always there. Every reaching hand and every death since the world began has felt me at its shoulder, though the living have made themselves forget it. You will not have the luxury of forgetting. You will feel me at your shoulder for the rest of your days, whatever number those days come to, and there will be nights you would give a great deal to feel only human loneliness instead of the loneliness of the accompanied. That too is the price. I'm telling you everything. Remember that I told you everything. When the cost comes due and you are tempted to say you were tricked, you will not be able to, and the not being able to is a mercy, though it will not feel like one. The figure drew back its hand, and the cold in Harry's chest banked itself down to an ember, still there, waiting, patient as its master. Go back now, Death said. The war is not paused, only slowed, and there is a piece of this night still to be lived. He will come tonight to the place above us where the fountain stands, and the old man will meet him, and they will duel as the two of them have always been going to duel. You will be there. Watch him. Watch the man you are going to unmake. Learn the shape of his certainty, because certainty is the only armor he has left that matters, and you are the one thing in the world that is going to take it from him. Do not reach for him tonight. You are not ready, and the fragment in you is not the one to begin with, and if you reach too soon you will lose more than you can spend so early. Watch, wait, begin where I show you to begin. Where do I begin? You will see it when you see it, Death said, and you will not mistake it. Go. The veil, hanging in the nothing, brightened until the frozen chamber beyond it was the only thing in all directions. Harry took a step toward it. The murmur of the dead did not follow him this time. It stayed behind, a low tide receding, and one voice out of the multitude rose for an instant clear of the rest, warm and rough and familiar, and it said something that was gone before he could hold it, something that might have been his name and might have been a laugh, and then the cloth was against his face, cold and not cloth, and he was through. Sound came back like a struck blow. "A thing you can do." Lupin was shouting, and his arms were around Harry's chest, and Harry realized he was still straining against them, that no time at all had passed here, that the whole vastness of the between place had fit into the sliver of a second in which a grieving man drew breath to finish a sentence. "He's gone." "I know," Harry heard himself say, and his own calm stopped Lupin's arms as surely as a spell. "I know, Remus, let me go, I won't go through." Something in the flatness of it made Lupin loosen his grip, and Harry stepped free and stood on the dais with the veil breathing at his back, and he did not turn to look at it because he could still feel the shore on the far side of it, tide coming in, and he did not trust himself to look at the cloth without reaching for it. Above him, the tiers of the chamber were a ruin of scattered light and running figures. Bellatrix was already gone up the far steps, laughing, her laughter unspooling behind her like a ribbon. And Harry looked at the world as Death had said he would, and the world had changed. He could see her, not Bellatrix. Through the stone and the steps in the distance, off to the north and downward, deep under London, where no living thing should have been able to see anything at all, there was a point of light that was not light. It was the opposite of light, a dark that shone, a cold star of wrongness burning somewhere under the earth, and it pulled at him gently the way a lodestone pulls at a needle it has not yet turned. He knew with the certainty Death had promised what it was. It was a piece of the man he was going to unmake. It hung in the world like a splinter under a nail, and it had felt him wake, and it wanted him, the way a wound wants the thing that will close it, and the wanting went both ways. There was another, closer, and this one he could not look at directly because it was inside his own head, behind the scar, a cold, curled-up small sleeping that he had lived beside so long he had mistaken it for the shape of his own thoughts. Now he could feel the edges of it. Now he knew it for a lodger and not a native. It stirred once, having felt the mark settle around it in the between place, and then it went still again, waiting, patient as everything in this new country he had agreed to walk. Harry. Lupin's hand on his shoulder. "We have to move, it isn't over." "No," Harry agreed, "it isn't." He went up the tiers with the veil sighing behind him and the cold star burning under the earth ahead and the sleeping splinter cold behind his eyes, and he did not run because running was for people who did not know where the thing they wanted was, and he knew now he could feel it, he would always be able to feel it. Bellatrix had reached the door at the top and flung it wide and vanished through into the black corridor beyond, still laughing, still certain she had won something tonight, and Harry followed her because that was the way out, and the way out was the way toward the fountain where Death had told him the man would come. He did not hurry. He had been given time enough, finally, to hear a thing said fully, and the thing that had been said to him was still ringing in the roots of his teeth, and it would go on ringing there, he understood, for the rest of whatever life the mark left him. He climbed toward the light of the atrium with the dead quiet behind him and the dead of the world hanging cold and bright in the dark ahead, and the shore came in against the inside of his hands and came in and did not stop. At the top of the stairs he paused, one hand on the cold iron of the door, and let the murmur that lived in the mark settle into something he could carry. Below and behind him the archway breathed its slow breath into the empty room. He did not look back at it. He had learned already the first rule of the country he now belonged to, which was that you did not look back at the shore unless you meant to walk into it, and he did not mean to, not yet. There was a debt to collect first, and a great many of the living to collect it for, and somewhere above him a man who had cheated the oldest thing in the world was about to learn, though he would not know it yet, that the shore had stopped waiting and had chosen a hand. Harry opened the door and went up into the noise and the falling light, and the atrium of the Ministry of Magic opened before him like a stage set for a play whose ending had just been rewritten. The golden fountain was in ruins, its statues shattered where a curse meant for a headmaster had gone wide. And there, at the center of it, tall and white and terrible in his certainty, stood the man himself, wand raised, red eyes bright with the pleasure of a hunt he believed he was winning. Voldemort had not felt him yet. That was the last thing Harry understood in that first moment, standing unnoticed at the mouth of the stairs, while Dumbledore and the Dark Lord circled each other through the wreckage of the fountain. Voldemort had torn his soul into pieces and scattered them through the world to make himself unkillable, and he did not know, could not know, that one of those pieces had just felt the shore reach through it and take hold, and that the reaching had a name now, and the name was standing 40 feet away in a torn school jumper with borrowed calm on its face, watching, learning the shape of a certainty it had been chosen to break. The duel began, and it was nothing like the duels Harry had learned in a classroom. Dumbledore moved through the wreckage of the fountain like a man at a set of instruments he had practiced on for a century. Water tore itself up out of the shattered basin and became a fist, a wall, a coiling rope of glass, and Voldemort met each of them with a lash of green or a word Harry did not know, and the two of them spoke to each other between the spells in a low, fast murmur that never once rose to a shout. That was the thing that unsettled Harry most, watching from the mouth of the stairs. He had imagined that a battle between the two greatest wizards alive would be all thunder. It was not. It was quiet and precise and terribly economical, two men who understood each other's minds so completely that half of what passed between them was cut short before it finished, answered before it was asked. Voldemort was smiling. Even losing ground, even with a serpent of animated glass winding itself around his white throat and shattering against a shield he raised without seeming to look, he was smiling, and the smile did not touch the red of his eyes, and Harry understood that this was the certainty death had told him to study. The man did not believe he could truly die. That disbelief was not bravado. It was the load-bearing wall of everything he was, and he had built it out of the pieces of his own soul, and it held him upright even here, even now, even with a wandless headmaster turning the ruins of a ministry against him. Then Voldemort felt him. Harry knew the instant it happened, because the splinter behind his scar came awake all at once, uncurling like a thing that had heard its own name called across a great distance. The red eyes came around and found Harry in the shadow of the stairs, and the smile changed, sharpened, and Voldemort abandoned the duel between one breath and the next because he had seen something better. He had seen the son of the woman in the cottage. He had seen the one who kept refusing to be finished. And the fragment of himself he did not know he had left there sang out to the whole of him, and he answered it the only way he had ever known how, which was to take. The atrium went out the way the chamber had gone out below, snuffed, but this was no journey to a patient shore. This was invasion. Harry felt the cold thing behind his scar swell and pour itself through him, and behind it, using it as a door, came Voldemort, all of him, all that terrible economical hunger flooding into Harry's skull and shouldering his own self down into the dark. There was a voice in his head that was not his voice, and it was delighted. It coiled around his heart and squeezed, and it said without sound so that only Harry could hear it, "Look at you. Look at the little vessel he has spent his whole life trying to save." And it turned Harry's face toward Dumbledore, and it meant to use Harry's mouth to say, "Kill me and end the vessel with me," because Voldemort had never once in his long refusal understood that there was any weapon in the world that could be turned against him from inside. He understood now. The mark woke. It did not fight Voldemort. That was the thing Harry would remember when he had time later to lay them in its end to end. It did not struggle or strain. It simply opened the way the veil had opened, the way a door opens onto a room that was always there, and on the far side of that door was the shore. Voldemort coiled through Harry's mind, reaching for Harry's mouth, poured himself forward into what he took for an empty and undefended boy, and instead of emptiness he found the cold that has never once been warm, the tide that comes in and does not stop, the patient enormous attention of the oldest thing that had ever agreed to be looked at. He found death waiting inside the vessel, and death knew him, and the shore reached up through the splinter he himself had made and brushed, for the first time in 15 years, against the raw, refused soul of Tom Riddle. The scream did not come from Harry's mouth. It came from inside his mind, from the thing that had invaded it, and it was a sound that had no business existing in a body, a sound of something ancient and proud recoiling from the one thing it had spent everything to escape. Voldemort tore himself out of Harry so violently that Harry went to his knees on the marble, both hands flat against the cold floor, and the atrium slammed back into being around him, the falling light, the wrecked fountain, Dumbledore's white face turning toward him, the murmur of arriving footsteps as the ministry finally, hopelessly late, came running. And Voldemort stood in the middle of the ruin with his wand loose in his hand, and something on his face that Harry had not seen there before and would spend the rest of the war learning to hunt for. Nothing like the cold pleasure of the duel, nothing like the certainty either. For the length of a single heartbeat, before the mask came down over it again, the Dark Lord's face wore the one expression it had sworn it would never wear again, the expression Cedric had worn in Sirius, the surprise that arrives too late. He had felt the shore. He had reached into the child who kept refusing to die, and he had touched death itself waiting there, patient, wearing Harry like a glove. And for one heartbeat Lord Voldemort had known, in the deep animal cellar beneath all his certainty, that something had changed in the order of the world and that the change was not in his favor. Then the mask came down. The red eyes found Dumbledore again, and the old man had his wand up now, and there were witnesses pouring into the atrium, the minister himself among them, mouth working, and Voldemort was too clever by half to be caught alive by an audience. He looked once more at Harry kneeling on the marble, and whatever he searched for in Harry's face he did not find, because Harry gave him nothing, only the same borrowed calm he had given Lupin, and under the calm the shore came in and in. "You have not won," Voldemort said. It was the only thing he said. His voice was very soft and very sure, and only Harry, perhaps, heard the hairline crack running under the certainty of it. "No," Harry agreed from the floor, "not yet." And Voldemort was gone, snatched into the whirling black of disapparition an instant before the minister's eyes found the place where he had stood, so that afterward there would be argument about whether he had truly been there at all, and Cornelius Fudge would stand in the ruin of his own denial with the proof screaming in his face and still, for one last moment, wish it were not so. Later, Harry could never afterward say how much later, because time had kept different accounts all night. He sat in the headmaster's office at Hogwarts with the dead instruments of the last war whirring softly around him and the portraits pretending to sleep. Dumbledore stood at the dark window with his back to the room, and had been standing there without speaking for a long while, and Harry let him, because Harry had learned in the between place how to sit inside a silence without needing to break it. "He was inside you," Dumbledore said at last to the glass. "In the atrium, I saw it happen, I saw him leave you, and I have been trying since to understand what drove him out, because it was not a thing I did. The old man turned. His eyes behind the half-moon spectacles were very tired and very sharp, and they moved over Harry like a reader over a text that had changed since he last opened it. "You are not telling me everything about tonight." "No," Harry said, "I'm not." He had meant to tell him. Walking up from the atrium in the long climb of the fireplaces and the corridors, he had rehearsed it, the veil, the shore, the cold hand above his heart. And then he had stepped into this room, and he had looked at the old man who loved him and was already, Harry could see it now with his changed sight, dying by fractions. A shadow of the same wrongness clinging to the blackened ruin of his wand hand where some curse had eaten into him. And Harry had understood that this was a burden that could not be shared, not because Dumbledore would not carry it, but because Dumbledore would try to carry it for him, would take it up out of love and old habit and the deep exhausted arrogance of a man who had spent a century deciding what was best for other people, and would spend himself against it and lose because it was not his to carry. Death had not chosen Albus Dumbledore. Death had chosen Harry. And some burdens, once given, could only be set down by the hand they were given to. "There are things I have to do," Harry said, "that I have to do myself. I found that out tonight. I can't tell you how I found it out. I'm sorry, I'm not—" He searched for it, and the borrowed calm gave him the words, "I'm not doing this to shut you out. I'm doing it because if I tell you, you'll try to take it, and it can't be taken. It was given to me, only me." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment, and Harry watched 100 questions rise in the blue eyes and be, one by one, set aside, and at the end of it the old man did a thing Harry had not expected. He inclined his head. It was a small motion and an enormous one, the motion of a man who had spent his life gathering the threads of other people's fates into his own hands, choosing, for once, to let one go. "When I was young," Dumbledore said quietly, "I too believed that the great burdens of the world were mine to carry because I was clever enough to lift them. It cost me everyone I loved. I have spent the years since learning, very slowly, that the deepest kind of respect one person can offer another is to believe them when they say a thing is theirs to bear." He came away from the window at last and stood over Harry, and the ruined hand hung at his side like a promise of the price all power exacts in the end. "I will not ask you again, but I will tell you one thing, and I ask you to carry it with whatever it is you are carrying. You are not a weapon, Harry, whatever anyone has made of you or you make of yourself. Do not let the doing of the terrible thing hollow out the one who does it. That is the oldest trap there is." He fell into it. "Do not follow him down." Harry stood, his legs held. Behind his eyes the splinter lay cold and quiet, and far off, under city he could not see, a dark star burned on in the deep earth, waiting for the hand that had been marked to come and call it home. "I'll try," Harry said, and found that he meant it, and found also that trying might be the most and the least he could honestly promise, standing where he stood, chosen by the shore, with the whole long hunt still ahead of him and the first cold star already burning in the dark. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. The terms of the chosen number 4 Privet Drive had never been a place where Harry slept well, and now it was a place where he did not sleep at all. It was not the old sleeplessness, the churn of nightmares that had ridden him since the graveyard, that he could have named and set beside the bed. This was different. Since the night at the ministry, he had lain awake with his eyes open in the dark of the smallest bedroom and listened to a sound that was not in the room, a low tide of murmuring that came in and went out at the very edge of hearing, and he had understood after the second night that it would not stop, that it had never truly stopped, that all his life it had been there under everything, and he had simply not been able to hear it until the shore reached up and put an ear inside him. The dead were always talking. That was the thing no one told the living. They talked all the time, quietly, endlessly, a great gray congregation of voices with the words worn off them, and once you could hear them you could not make yourself deaf again. He sat up on the third night and put his back against the wall and his knees up and watched the streetlight throw the shape of the window across the ceiling, and he practiced the sight because there was nothing else to do with the dark hours, and because death had told him the sight would sharpen with use. It did. He found that if he unfocused his eyes and let the room go soft, the ordinary things lost their glow of daylight memory and went flat, and against that flatness the 2 points of wrongness stood out like coals in ash. One was behind his own eyes, close and cold and sleeping, the splinter that had lived in his scar since the cottage. He had learned not to look at that one too long. When he looked at it, it looked back, and the looking back had a texture he did not like, a slow attention swimming up from a great depth, and he would feel the old ache start in the scar and make himself think of something ordinary until the cold settled again. The other point was far away and low, sunk under distance and stone somewhere to the north and west, and it did not sleep. It turned. Slowly, ceaselessly, the way a compass needle turns hunting the pole, and Harry understood that it was hunting him, that all the scattered pieces of the man were needles now and he was the pole, and that this pull would not weaken as long as both of them existed in the world. It was almost restful in a terrible way to be wanted so completely and so simply. The fragment did not want anything from him but reunion. It did not lie, it could not lie. It only pulled, and he pulled back, and between them the taut invisible line hummed like a wire in wind. He wondered, those first sleepless nights, whether the fragment could feel him as he felt it, whether there was enough of a mind in a torn scrap of a soul to know it was being hunted. He decided that it could and that it did, and that this was the strangest part of the whole new country he had walked into. That the thing he was going to unmake wanted to be found almost as badly as he wanted to find it, that the two of them, the hunter and the quarry, were bound by the same hungry cord and pulling in the same direction toward a reunion that meant one thing to the fragment and the opposite to Harry. It was not like any hunt he had read of. There was no fleeing prey. There was only a piece of a dead man's refusal, lying in a box under a floor 100 miles off, straining toward the hand that would end it, glad in whatever blind way a splinter can be glad that someone was finally coming. Downstairs a door closed. Uncle Vernon up early to be angry about something before work. The house went through its motions around Harry, the running tap, the radio, the heavy tread on the stairs, and none of it touched him, and he found that he could not remember, sitting there, exactly what Aunt Petunia's Sunday roast smelled like, though he had smelled it every week for 15 years through the door of his cupboard and then his room. He reached for it. The memory was there and it had no smell. It was a photograph of a smell, the fact of it without the thing itself, and he sat with that absence for a while and did not understand it because he had not yet paid for anything and did not know that the mark once set begins to charge a small standing rent simply for being carried. He would understand it later. For now he let it go because the alternative was to worry at it, and worrying was for people who did not know what they were doing, and he was beginning to know. The letters came the way they always came, 3 or 4 a week, Hedwig ghosting in at the window with parchment tied to her leg and an expectation in her amber eyes that Harry write back at proper length. Ron's were full of Chudley cannons and complaints about denoming the garden and a careful, clumsy circling around the thing none of them could say straight, which was Sirius, the empty place at the middle of the summer where a godfather should have been. Hermione's were longer and more worried and read, under the news of her holiday in France, like a hand reaching across a distance for a wrist it could not find. "Are you all right?" she wrote and underlined it, and Harry sat at the small desk with a quill going dry in his fingers and discovered that he could not answer the question because there was no true answer he was permitted to give, and he had stopped, somewhere in the last fortnight, being able to write the comfortable lie. He wrote in the end that he was fine, that the Dursleys were ignoring him, that he was counting the days. All of it was true and none of it was the truth, and he sealed the parchment and gave it to Hedwig and watched her carry it out over the identical roofs of Privet Drive toward 2 people who loved him and would have walked into any fire in the world at his side, and who could not be told because the thing he carried could not be halved and shared, it could only be carried, and the carrying was a country with a border, and they lived on the other side of it. He had not understood before the ministry that knowledge could be a kind of exile. He understood it now. He would come to understand it better. Dudley found him on the stairs the next morning and stopped, the way a large animal stops when it scents something it cannot see. His cousin had been strange with him all summer, quiet, giving Harry a wide berth in the narrow house, and Harry had put it down to the Dementors on Magnolia Crescent the year before, the thing they had made Dudley feel and see. Now Dudley stood 2 steps down with a bath towel over one enormous shoulder and looked at Harry with an expression that did not belong on his face, which was the expression of a person trying to place a smell of burning in a house where nothing should be on fire. "You've gone funny," Dudley said. It was not an insult. It was almost, in its blunt way, a warning offered across 15 years of enmity by a boy who had no other language for warnings. "Your eyes, they've gone funny." Like, and he groped for it and could not reach it and gave up and finished, weakly, "Like when the cold things came. Like you're looking at something behind me." "There's nothing behind you, Dudley," Harry said, and it was gentle, and it was a lie because there was always something behind everyone now, the low gray murmur, the tide of the ones who had already gone, and Harry had learned in 2 weeks to look past it into the faces of the living, but the looking past left a mark on how he looked, and his cousin, who felt everything and understood nothing, had caught the edge of it. Dudley went down the stairs sideways, keeping Harry in view, and did not turn his back until he reached the hall. Harry stood where he was for a while after the bathroom door had shut, and thought that of all the people who might have noticed first that he had changed, it should not have been Dudley, and that there was a lesson in it somewhere about who truly sees us, and he did not care for the lesson, and he let it go into the growing pile of things he could not afford to hold, where the smell of the roast had already gone. On the 7th night, death came. He knew he was asleep and knew also that this was not a dream, because dreams have the wrong weight, and this had the weight of the between place, the pressure of an absence too large to be a room. He was standing on the shore. He understood it as a shore, though there was no water and no sand, only the endless soft murmur going out into a dark that had unlearned its edges, and the tide of it came in over his bare feet, cold as the space between the stars, and did not wet them. And the figure was there, tall past comfort, wrapped in the folded wing dark, and the pale still hands were folded before it, and the vast patient attention settled over Harry like a held breath. "You have been practicing," Death said. "Good, the sight is a muscle, neglected it withers, and a chosen hand that cannot see is worse than useless, for it reaches in the dark and takes hold of the wrong things. You will need it strong. There are more of him scattered in the world than you have found, and some of them are hidden with great care behind old magic and old cruelty, and you will not stumble on those. You will have to hunt them the long way with your wits and only your wits, for the sight will bring you to the room and then go quiet and leave the rest to you." "How many?" Harry said. The dark shifted and the murmur drew back from around his feet, and above him where a sky should have been the darkness filled with points of cold light, a scattering of them, low and burning, each one turning, each one hunting. He counted without meaning to. 5 of them out in the world, spread across a country he could feel the shape of below him like a sleeper feels the shape of a bed. A 6th, close and behind his own eyes, that he did not need to look up to find. And a 7th that was not like the others, higher and fainter, a smear rather than a star, a smoke where the rest were coals. 6 he made on purpose, Death said, following the count in Harry's mind before he could ask. 6 because he meant his soul to lie in 7 parts, the 6 he scattered through the world and the 7th he kept in his own breast, and he loved that number and believed it would armor him, and he was clever, and clever men are the easiest of all to catch because they build their traps out of the things they are proudest of, and their pride tells you where to dig. 5 of the 6 he hid are still whole and burning out in the world. In the piece behind your scar he never meant to make it all. It was torn loose by accident the night at the cottage and lodged in you, and it will be the last, and we will not speak yet of how that one comes home because you are not ready to hear it, and I do not waste a warning before its hour. And the 6th of them, Harry said, the faint one, the smoke, that one is already dead and yet not gathered. The pale hands turned, palms up, and one of the cold points high above dimmed and guttered as Harry looked at it, a fire long past its fuel. He made a vessel when he was young, a book, and poured a piece of himself into it, and 4 years ago that vessel was destroyed by a hand that did not know what it was destroying. A pause, and in the pause Harry saw a memory rise unbidden, a basilisk fang, an inkwell of a diary bleeding black, a girl with color coming back into her face on a cold stone floor. The vessel is gone, the fragment is not. When you break the jar, the water does not cease to be water. It ran out into the between, and it has hung there ever since, unclaimed, denied the shore because the whole of him is still refused, and the pieces cannot come home while the trunk holds the door. That smoke is a wound that will not close until every star beneath it has gone dark. You will not need to hunt it. When the last of him is unmade, it will settle of its own accord like silt when the river finally stops. I show it to you only so that you understand the size of what he did. He did not only cheat me once. He tore himself 8 ways and left the tears open, and the world has been bleeding through them for 15 years, and no one has felt it but me, and now you. Harry looked up at the low burning constellation of the man he was going to unmake, and turned slowly on the shore that was not a shore, and let the sight tell him what it could. The nearest star, the one to the north and west that had pulled at him every night since the ministry, hung a little apart from the others, low and steady and old. That one, he said, the near one, what is it? A ring. Something that was almost approval moved through the great stillness. The first he ever made after the book, and the one he hid the least well because he hid it in the one place he was certain no one would ever think to look for a treasure, which was among the ruin of the people he came from and despised. Pride again. It sits in a fallen house on a hill above a village, under a floor inside a box, and the box is nailed shut with a curse so old and so hateful that it is not really a lock at all but a mouth, and it waits for a hand to come and open it so that it can bite. Any living hand that touches that ring meaning to destroy it will be bitten, and the bite does not heal, and it does not stop. It only slows, spreading up the arm and into the body over months until it reaches the heart, and the hand's owner comes to me the long, ugly way. That is the trap he built. It has never yet failed to close on a reaching hand. Harry considered that. He had learned in the between place that he could consider things here without the fear rushing in to hurry him, and he used the room the shore gave him. But I'm not a living hand, he said slowly, working it out aloud, because saying a thing aloud was how he found the holes in it. Not only living, that's the whole point of me. The curse bites a living hand because it wants to drag the toucher to death as punishment for reaching, but death is where I already stand. So when you reach for it, Death said, and the patience in the voice had a keen edge under it now, the edge of a teacher watching a pupil find the answer. The curse will strike at you as it strikes at everything, and it will find that it is striking at the shore, and a curse whose whole strength is the threat of death has no strength at all against the thing it is threatening you with. It will break against you like a wave against a cliff. You will feel it. It will not be pleasant, and you must not mistake unpleasant for dangerous, because the day you begin to flinch from the unpleasant is the day you begin to fail. But it cannot take you the way it would take another. That is the first lesson of the hunt, and I give it to you freely, and I will not give you many freely after this. You are the one reacher in the world the traps were not built to catch. Everything he made assumes a living enemy. You are not quite that. Use it. Harry turned the ring over in his mind, and the shape of the method came to him, clean and hard and simple, and he liked the cleanness of it because so little in his life had ever been clean. I reach, he said, I take hold, I'm cert, and I call it home, and you do the rest. You call it home, and I do the rest. Assent like a bell already finished ringing. Hear the shape of the rest so that it does not frighten you the first time, for a chosen hand that is frightened by its own instrument is a hand that lets go at the wrong moment. When you take hold of a fragment and call it, you will become, for a breath, the doorway you were in the atrium when he poured himself into you and found me waiting. The shore will open through your hand. The fragment will be drawn out of its vessel and through you and down to me, and in that passage it will be unmade, not broken, not burned, but given at last the death it was cheated of and closed over so that it can never anchor anything again. You will feel it pass through you. It will be cold, and it will be brief, and it will leave a mark, not on your skin. The pale hands lifted, and the enormous attention behind them sharpened to a point Harry felt in his sternum. This is the part you must hear and hold. Every fragment that passes through you takes a toll in the passing, not blood, not years, a warmth, a belonging, some small human thing that ties you to the country of the living, plucked out and carried down with the fragment as the ferryman's coin. You will not choose what it takes. You will not always notice it going. But at the end of every unmaking you will be a little less able to sit in a lit room among your own kind and feel that you are one of them. That is the price paid in installments, and I told you of it on the first night, and I tell you again now because the second telling is the one that lands when the dead has a face. Harry was quiet on the shore for a while. The murmur of the dead came in over his feet, cold and endless, and did not wet them. The roast, he said, Aunt Petunia's Sunday roast, I can't smell it anymore. When I remember it, it's just the fact of it now. Is that something you did? Have I already started to? No. The word was not unkind. You have unmade nothing yet. That is only the rent the mark charges for being carried, and it is small, and it stops when you learn to stop feeling for the things it has thinned. What comes after the first unmaking will be larger, and it will not thin a smell. It will take a thing you would miss. A pause, and then, with a weight that Harry would carry down off the shore and into every hunt after, I do not tell you this to turn you back. I tell you this so that when the cost comes you will meet it standing and not spend the strength you need for the work on being betrayed by a price you were warned of twice. He was betrayed by every price he ever paid because he never once agreed to a single one of them in advance. That is the difference between the two of you that matters most in the end. He tears, you give. Both of you spend a soul to do what you do. Only one of you does it with his eyes open. Why me? Harry said, and it was not the question he had asked in the ministry, not the mechanics of it, the splinter and the loophole, but the older question under that one, the one that had followed him his whole life. Not why am I able to? You told me that. Why am I willing? You said I could say no. You said you don't compel. So why does everyone always know before I do that I'm going to say yes? Great stillness regarded him, and there was something in the regard that had not been there before, a kind of grave courtesy, the attention one gives to a thing that has surprised one by being more than an instrument. Because you have spent your whole short life, Death said, watching people be taken from you by a thing you could not fight, and you have decided, somewhere below the place where decisions have words, that if you ever found a way to fight it you would pay any price the fighting asked. I did not put that. He did the night at the cottage, and every death he has caused since. I only recognized it. I have watched a great many souls come to my shore, and I have learned to know, from a long way off, the ones who will not sit down when they are tired. You are one of those. It is not a comfort. It is very often the opposite of a comfort. But it is the truest thing about you, and it is why you will say yes, and it is why I chose you and not the old man who is even now hunting the ring with a living hand, meaning to open the box himself because he is brave and clever and cannot bear to ask a child to bleed for the world when he still has blood of his own to spend. Harry's attention sharpened. Dumbledore's going after the ring. He has found the hill and the house. He does not yet know precisely where in the ruin the box is buried, and so you have a little time, but not much, and you should not waste it, because on the day he finds the box he will open it, and the mouth will bite, and it will begin to kill him by inches over the better part of a year, and he will hide the dying as he hides everything, and he will die of it in the end for the sake of a ring you could have unmade in a breath without so much as a scar. You cannot let him reach it first. Not because his death would fail the work, the ring would still need you, bit in hand or not, but because a hand like his, spent on a task it was never suited to, is a waste that a grieving thing would mourn. I am not a grieving thing, you are, so do not let it happen. Go to him. Do not tell him what you are. Tell him only that you must be the one to touch the box and that you cannot say why, and let him be a wise enough man to hear the truth in a thing he is not permitted to understand. He'll want to know how I know where it is. Then do not know where it is until he shows you. Let him lead you to the hill. Let him think he is protecting you by keeping you close, which is a thing he has wanted to believe he could do since you were an infant on a doorstep, and which he has never once managed, and which he will leap at the chance to believe again. Give the old man the gift of feeling for one afternoon that he is the one keeping you safe. He has earned that much fiction. And then when you stand before the box, take it out of his hands before he can open it, and do the thing you were chosen to do, and let him watch, and let him understand as much of it as watching can teach. He will understand a great deal. He is the cleverest man alive, and the second cleverest was the one who tore his soul, and between those two the difference has never been cleverness. It has been what they were willing to do with it. The shore began to thin. Harry felt the between place loosening its hold, the pressure of the great absence lifting, the murmur receding, the cold points of the constellation dimming one by one back into the dark. He had 100 more questions and knew he would not be given time for them because time was kept on different accounts here and his account was closing. Death, he said before it could go. Sirius, you said he's at rest. Is he? Can he hear this? Any of it? Does he know what I'm doing? The great stillness held a moment longer than it needed to, and when it answered, the answer had in it a thing that was not comfort, because death did not deal in comfort, but that sat beside comfort and did the same work. The dead do not watch the living, Death said. That is a cruelty the living invent to frighten themselves, the notion of the beloved dead leaning over the rail of heaven to see every failure. They do not lean. They are at rest, which means they have set down the whole weight of caring how the story ends, because they are already at the end, and the end was kind. He is not watching you. He does not need to. He set down his fear for you the moment he reached my shore, and that is the truest freedom there is, and you should not wish it undone by imagining him anxious in the dark on your account. Do the work for the living who can still be lost, not for the dead who cannot. That is the last thing I will give you freely. Wake up, Harry woke. The smallest bedroom was gray with the first of the light, and the street light had gone off, and the murmur was still there at the edge of hearing, and the 2 points of cold still burned in the flatness behind his unfocused eyes, one near and sleeping, one far and turning. He lay still and let the terms settle into him, one over another, until they made a single weight he could stand up under. 7 made on purpose, 6 still whole, one behind his scar. 1 dead and not yet gathered, a ring on a hill under a curse that could not bite the shore, an old man walking toward it with a living hand. He got up, he dressed. He wrote a letter to Dumbledore in the gray light, and then tore it up, because a letter could be intercepted and because there was nothing in it he could safely put in words, and he understood that this was going to be the shape of the whole hunt, this having of enormous knowledge that could be spoken to no one. this walking through the ordinary world carrying a thing too large for any sentence. He would have to learn to carry it without setting it down and without letting it show, because the moment it showed, someone he loved would try to take it, and it could not be taken. It could only be carried by the one hand it had been given to. Dumbledore came for him 3 nights later. He came as he had come in Harry's dream of the future, out of the summer dark with his silver hair and his traveling cloak, and Harry, watching from the window of the smallest bedroom, saw before Dumbledore reached the door the thing he had been told to look for and had hoped, past reason, not to find. The old man's right hand hung at his side, and it was not blackened, not yet, not this time, and the seeing of the unburned hand went through Harry with a force he had no name for, because it meant he was not too late, because it meant the future death had shown him was still a thing that could be refused. He had spent his life arriving too late. Cedric, Sirius, the graveyard. This once for once he had arrived first, and the hand on the man coming up the garden path was whole, and Harry stood at the window with the sight burning quietly behind his eyes and understood that this was what the mark was for. Not power, arrival. Being early for once to the place where the loss was going to happen and standing in the doorway of it and saying no. He went down to open the door before Dumbledore could knock, and the old man looked at him on the threshold with those tired blue eyes that had already, Harry could see, guessed more than they would ever say, and neither of them spoke for a moment, the child who had been chosen by the shore and the old man who had spent a century trying to spare children exactly the choosing. "Good evening, Harry," Dumbledore said at last. "You have grown this summer, not taller, I think, something else." He studied Harry's face and did not ask what the something else was, and Harry understood the not asking for the enormous gift it was. "I have come to ask a favor of you and to offer one in return, and I find, looking at you, that I am no longer certain which of us is doing which. Will you come with me tonight? There's a place I must go, an old ruined house on a hill above a village called Little Hangleton, and a thing buried under its floor that I mean to retrieve, and I would be glad of your company and gladder still of your hands, though I cannot yet tell you why." "Yes," Harry said. He had his trunk packed already. He had packed it the morning after the dream. "I'll come, and when we get there you have to let me be the one to touch it, the thing under the floor. I can't tell you why either. But it has to be me, and it has to be my hand, and if you reach for it first it will hurt you in a way that won't stop, and I'd rather anything than watch that happen to you, so promise me, my hand, not yours." Dumbledore was quiet on the doorstep, and the summer dark stood around them, and somewhere to the north and west a cold star turned in its buried box and pulled at the both of them, at the old man who could not feel it and the child who could feel nothing else. And whatever Dumbledore read in Harry's face in that silence, it made him do the thing he had done in the office at Hogwarts on the night of the Ministry, the small enormous thing, the bowing of the cleverest man alive to truth he was not permitted to hold. "I promise," Dumbledore said. "Your hand, not mine. Come then, we have a long way to go, and the night is not as young as it looks, and there is a house on a hill that has been waiting a very long time for someone to come and take back what it hides. Let us not keep it waiting until morning." They went out together into the dark, the old man and the marked one, and behind them the door of number 4 swung shut on a house that would never quite understand what it had raised. Dumbledore offered his arm at the end of the garden path, and Harry took it, and the world folded. Side-along apparition was worse than the drag of a portkey and shorter, a squeeze through a space too small for a body, the pressure of it clamping around Harry's ribs and eyes and eardrums, and then the summer night unfolded again into somewhere else and the pressure let go. They stood on a country lane between 2 dark hedges. The air smelled of cut hay and something older under it, wet stone, standing water, the particular green rot of a place that has been left too long to itself. Above them the sky was strewn with real stars, ordinary and cold and indifferent, and Harry looked up at them out of long habit before he remembered that the stars he needed to read were not in the sky at all, and lowered his eyes and let the sight come up. The buried star was close now. It was no longer a point low on a far horizon, but a coal burning through the earth a half-mile off, up the shoulder of a black hill that rose beyond the roofs of a sleeping village, and its pull had changed from a thread to a rope, from a hum to a low steady drag against the middle of him, so that standing still on the lane he had to lean very slightly against nothing to keep from drifting toward it. The fragment knew he had come. It had known since the world folded. It turned in its box under the ruined floor and pulled, and Harry pulled back without meaning to, and between them the taut line sang. "You feel it," Dumbledore said. He was watching Harry's face in the starlight, and there was no surprise in his own, only the grave attention of a man confirming a thing he had already privately decided. "Whatever it is that has changed in you this summer, it has a compass in it, and the compass points at the thing under the hill. I will not ask you how. I gave you my word. But I will say this, Harry, because we are about to walk up that hill together, and I would not have us walk up it as strangers to each other's purposes. I have hunted this thing for the better part of a year, with books and with memories and with a great deal of guessing, and you have found it in the time it takes to turn your head. Whatever you have become, it was made for exactly this. I find that I am glad of it and afraid of it, and I am too old to pretend those two things do not live side by side." They went up through the village. Little Hangleton slept around them, curtained and shuttered, a war memorial standing sentinel at the crossroads, and a church with a squat gray tower, and beyond a low wall a graveyard where the older stones leaned at angles the moonlight made theatrical. Harry slowed as they passed the graveyard gate. He knew this place. He had not known its name, but he knew its shape, because he had knelt in it a year ago with his arm cut open and a cauldron boiling and a thing rising out of the steam that wore a face like a snake, and he found that he could pick out, even from the lane, the great marble headstone taller than the rest, the one he had been bound to, the one with the sculpted figure of Death standing over the name Tom Riddle with a scythe in its stone hands. The stone Death looked nothing like the real one. The living had carved their idea of it, a robed reaper, a grim theatrical butcher, and the real thing was so much vaster and so much quieter and so much more terrible than a man with a farm tool that the carving would have been funny if Harry had had any laughter left to spend on it. He did not stop. He looked at the leaning stone reaper standing guard over the grave of the man who had refused it, and he thought without heat, without a single wasted degree of feeling, you carved the wrong thing, and he walked on up the hill. The gaunt house, when they reached it, was less a house than the memory of one. It crouched at the edge of a stand of black trees with its roof half fallen and its windows blind and a nettle-choked ruin of a garden swallowing the path to its door. And over the door, nailed there and rotted almost to a smear, hung something that had once been a snake. A real snake, dead and dried and fixed to the wood as a threshold charm by hands that had wanted the whole world to know what blood lived here. The magic of the place was old and mean and thick, and Harry could feel it lying over the ruin like a second darkness, a warding built out of pride and hatred, and the particular venom of a family that had loved nothing in the world but the fact of what it had descended from. And under all of it, under the floor of the tumble-down front room, the coal burned, steady and patient and turning, so bright to the sight now that Harry had to squint the inner eye against it, a cold sun buried in a grave that had been dug for a ring and had waited 15 years for a hand. Dumbledore stopped at the broken gate and did not go through. He looked at the ruin and then at Harry, and the starlight caught the half-moon spectacles and turned them to 2 blank coins. "It is inside," Harry said. It was not a question, and Dumbledore did not treat it as one. Under the floor of the front room, in a box, and the box is a mouth, and it's been hungry for a very long time. He turned to the old man and put into his voice all the flat certainty the shore had lent him, because this was the moment the promise had been made for. "When we go in, you stand back, all the way back by the door where you can watch and where you can't be tempted. You gave me your word, my hand, not yours. Whatever happens, whatever it looks like it's doing to me, you do not reach for it, and you do not reach for me. Say it again, say you'll stand back." For a moment, the oldest habit in Albus Dumbledore rose up behind his eyes, the century-old reflex to shield, to intervene, to spend himself rather than watch a child bleed, and Harry watched him wrestle it down and win barely, the way a man wins against a thing he has fed every day of his life. "I will stand back," Dumbledore said. "God help me, I will stand at the door and I will watch, and I will not lift a hand. You have my word twice now, Harry, do not make me regret the giving of it." He pushed the broken gate open, and it shrieked on its ruined hinge, and the sound of it went out over the sleeping hill and came back thinner, and the two of them stood at the threshold of the fallen house with the dead snake rotting over the door and the cold star burning under the floor, and neither of them moved to be the first one in. Then Harry stepped over the threshold, because that was what he had come for, and the old magic of the place closed over him like water, and the buried coal blazed up to meet the hand it had been hunting since before he could walk. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3, the first unmaking. Inside, the house smelled of the grave it had become. The front room had a floor of packed earth and broken flags, a collapsed hearth, and a single window through which the starlight fell in a long pale bar across the ruin. Small animals had lived here and died here. Ivy had come in at the window and given up. And under all of it, under the third flagstone from the cold hearth, the buried star burned so brightly to the sight that Harry could have walked to it blindfolded, could have found it in a house a mile wide, because it was the only true thing in the room and everything else was only rubble arranged around it. Dumbledore stopped just inside the door as he had promised and lifted his wand, and a soft light bloomed at its tip and steadied the shadows. He did not come further. He stood with his back near the rotted frame and his ruined that was not yet ruined right hand loose at his side, and he watched, and the watching was its own kind of labor for him. Harry could see the cost of the stillness in the old man's shoulders. It went against everything he was to stand at a door while a child walked toward a curse, and he stood there anyway, and Harry understood that the standing was the largest thing Dumbledore had ever given him, larger than any lesson, because it was made entirely of trust, and trust was the one currency the old man had spent his whole life being unable to afford. "Talk me through it," Dumbledore said quietly. "If you can, not because I doubt you. Because I would understand if understanding is permitted, and because a thing spoken aloud is a thing another can carry if the speaker falls." "Fair," Harry said. He knelt by the third flagstone and set his fingers to the edge of it, and it lifted with a grind of grit, lighter than it looked, because whoever had buried the box had wanted to be able to visit it. Under the flag was a shallow hollow lined with rotted cloth, and in the hollow sat a box, small, black. Its lid worked with a device Harry recognized without knowing why, a triangle and a circle and a straight line laid one over another, the whole thing cut deep into the wood by a patient blade. "There's a piece of him in the box, not a memory of him, not an echo. A living piece of his soul, cut off and sealed in, and it's been sitting here 15 years keeping the door of death propped open for the rest of him. That's what a Horcrux is, that's the thing you've been reading about all year." He looked up at the old man across the pale bar of starlight. "You knew most of that already." "Most of it," Dumbledore agreed. "Not the propped door. I knew what he had done. I did not know what it cost the world for him to have done it. You speak of it as though you have seen the cost." "I have," Harry said, and left it there, and Dumbledore let him. He turned back to the box. The curse lay over it like oil on water, a shimmer only the sight could catch, and it was exactly what death had said it would be, not a lock but a mouth, a patient starving mouth built out of the gaunt family's whole inheritance of spite, and it had been waiting so long to bite something that its hunger had gone thin and sharp and eager. Harry studied it as he had learned to study any problem from the edges in, looking for the assumption it was built on, because every trap is built on an assumption and the assumption is the crack. Here's the shape of it, he said, half to Dumbledore and half to himself, because saying it aloud was how he found the holes. This curse is built to punish a living hand that reaches in to destroy the ring. It doesn't stop the hand, it lets the hand take the ring. Then it bites, and the bite is death, slow death, spreading up the arm over months so that whoever destroys the Horcrux pays for it with their life. He wasn't trying to keep the ring safe. He was trying to make sure that anyone clever enough to find it and brave enough to break it would die of the breaking. It's not a guard dog, it's a landmine. It assumes the person reaching for it is afraid of dying. He set his fingers over the lid of the box, above the shimmer, not touching, feeling the mouth strain toward the warmth of his living skin. That's the assumption, that's the crack, because I'm not anymore, not the way it needs me to be. Harry, Dumbledore's voice was very level, which was how Harry knew what it was costing him. If you're wrong about this, I'm not wrong. He did not say it to boast. He said it because it was simply, coldly true, and because a hand that hesitated at the last would be bitten by its own hesitation and not by any curse. You promised, stand back. He opened the box, the mouth bit. It came up out of the black wood in a rush, the whole starved patient hatred of it, and it fastened on Harry's hand and his wrist and his arm, and it was cold, colder than the summer night, colder than the earth, and it drove up through his skin, hunting for the thing it had been made to find, which was the fear of death, the animal flinch that would let it in. Harry felt it searching him. He felt it race up his arm and into his chest and open there like a black flower, hunting for the place where a person keeps their terror of ending, the soft place all the living carry, the place it had opened in 100 imagined victims and drunk them dry. There was nothing there for it to open. Where his terror of death should have been, there was the shore. The curse plunged into Harry, hunting for a frightened boy, and found instead the tide that comes in and does not stop, the cold that has never once been warm, the patient enormous fact of the thing it had been threatening him with, already inside him, already home. A curse whose entire strength is the promise of death has no strength at all against a hand that death has already claimed. It broke. Harry felt it break, felt the black flower crumple and the cold reverse, and the whole hungry length of it recoil back down his arm and out of his skin and into the box and gutter there, spent undone, a landmine that had gone off against a wall of stone and cracked itself instead of the wall. His hand was cold to the elbow, and it shook faintly, and it was whole, unbitten, the skin unmarked. It's broken, he said, his voice was steady. His hand was not, and he let it shake, because death had told him not to mistake unpleasant for dangerous, and this had been only unpleasant. The curse, it's gone, it couldn't find anything to bite. Behind him he heard Dumbledore let out a breath that had been held for the better part of a minute, and did not turn to look, because there was a thing in the box now that had all of his attention. The ring lay in the hollow of the black wood. It was heavy gold, old gold, and set into it was a stone, a black stone, crude and uncut and cracked down the middle. And on the face of the stone was carved the same device as the box lid, the triangle and the circle and the line. And the fragment burned inside the gold, a cold sun turning, and now that the curse was broken it knew there was nothing left between it and the hand it had hunted for 15 years, and it did the only thing it had ever been able to do, which was pull and want and reach. But the stone reached too, and the stone reached differently. Harry felt at the moment his eyes found the cracked black face of it, a second pull laid over the first, quieter, sweeter, more terrible for its quiet. The fragment wanted reunion, blind and simple. The stone wanted to give him something, he did not know its name yet. He would learn it later, the old story of 3 brothers and 3 gifts in a road at dusk, the stone that calls the dead back to the edge of the world. He did not need the name to feel what it was offering. It offered the dead. It offered them the way water offers itself to a man who has been walking a long time in the sun, without argument, without condition. Here, take, drink. And Harry knelt over the box with the fragment pulling at his marked hand and the stone pulling at the oldest wound in him. And for the length of 3 heartbeats he did not move, because the stone had found the one door in him the curse had failed to find, and it had opened it, and through it came the dead. Sirius first, of course Sirius first. Not seen, not heard, nothing so crude as a ghost. A pressure at the edge of the room, a warmth, the particular quality of a presence Harry had known for 2 years and lost 11 weeks ago, and with it unbidden the memory of a bark of laughter in the kitchen at Grimmauld Place, rough and delighted and alive. And behind Sirius, further off, 2 more, a man and a woman he had never truly known and had spent his whole life reaching for, and the stone said without words, turn me. Turn me 3 times in your hand and they will stand in this room, solid enough to speak, and you can ask them everything and they can tell you they are proud and you will not be alone in this any longer. Turn me, it costs so little, only 3 turns of your wrist. You have paid so much already, let something be given back. Harry stayed very still, and the shore came in against the inside of his hands, and he heard, under the sweetness of the stone, the voice of the oldest thing in the world saying a thing it had said to him on a shore that was not a shore. Do not choose for the dead. They are already home. Choose for the living if you choose at all. There are a great many of the living. He closed his eyes. Behind them the stone's dead pressed close, warm, patient, wanting nothing but to be summoned, and it would have been so easy, it would have been the easiest thing he had ever done, and that was how he knew it was the trap and not the curse that had been meant to finish him here. The curse had been built for a frightened man, the stone had been built for a grieving one. Riddle had not put the stone in the ring, could not have known what it truly was, had wanted it only for the pride of owning a Peveril heirloom. But the two of them together, curse and stone, made a snare for the whole of a human heart, one jaw for the ones who feared death and one for the ones who could not let it go, and Harry had walked into a house that had a trap for each half of him, and the first half had broken against the shore, and the second half was the one that could still take him. "They're at rest," he said aloud to the room, to the stone, to himself. His voice was not steady now, he let it not be steady. One beat, he thought, one beat per scene, and this is the beat, this is the one that costs, and he spent it. He told me they're at rest. He told me the dead don't lean over the rail to watch us fail. If I call them back to the edge to tell me they're proud, I'm not doing it for them. They don't need it. I'm doing it for me because I'm tired and I'm alone in this, and I want my godfather to laugh in a kitchen one more time. He opened his eyes and looked at the cracked black stone and the warm crowd of the dead standing patient at the edge of the world, and he said the hardest sentence he had ever said, and he said it gently because they deserved gentleness even in the refusing. "I'm not going to turn you. Go home, all of you. Go home and rest. I'll come to the shore myself when it's my hour and not 1 minute before, and I'll bring you the whole story then. But I won't drag you back to the doorway to keep me company. You've earned the far side of it. Go." The pressure at the edge of the room eased. The warmth withdrew, not wrenched away, not lost, only allowed at last to go where it had been trying to go, and the memory of Sirius's laugh rang once more, clear and rough and whole, and then quieted, and the stone's second pull went dark and did not come back. And Harry knelt over the box in the pale bar of starlight with wet on his face that he did not wipe away, because there was no one in the room whose opinion of his face could matter less to him than his own, and only the first pull remained now, the fragment, blind and simple, turning in the gold, wanting reunion. "Now," Harry said to no one, to the shore. "Now I'm certain." He took the ring out of the box and closed his marked hand around it, gold and stone and burning fragment together, and he called it home. The shore opened through his hand. He became, as he had in the atrium, a doorway. The front room of the ruined house fell away, or rather it stayed exactly where it was and became suddenly thin, a painted screen with the true thing pressing behind it, and the true thing was the tide, the endless soft murmur, the cold that had never once been warm, pouring up out of the depth beneath his palm, and reaching through the gold for the cold sun buried in it. The fragment felt the shore take hold and understood, in whatever way a torn scrap of a soul can understand, that the reunion it had hunted for was not the reunion it had wanted, and it thrashed. It was Riddle, or a piece of him, and every piece of Riddle carried the whole of his refusal, and it fought the way the whole of him had fought in the atrium, all that economical hunger straining against the hand, screaming without a voice, promising, bargaining, threatening, offering Harry the same 3 turns of the wrist and 100 other things besides, power, knowledge, and end to being tired. Harry held on. The shore came in and in. And the fragment was drawn out of the gold and up through the marked hand and into Harry and down through him, down the long depth his hands had opened onto since the night at the ministry, down to the tide, and the tide closed over it, and it was not broken and it was not burned. It was unmade. It was given at last, the death it had been cheated of 15 years before, and gathered and closed over, so that where a piece of Tom Riddle had hung in the world holding a door open, there was now only a bad man's ordinary death, paid, received, done, and it took its coin. Harry felt the price go the way death had promised he would not always feel it, but this first time he felt it, because the first time is always the one that teaches. As the fragment passed down through him to the shore, it reached in passing, and it took something, plucked it clean out of him the way a hand plucks a thread from a cloth, and carried it down and away. He did not know what it was until it was gone. Then he reached for it out of the old reflex, the way you touch a tooth that has just been pulled, and found the socket, Sirius's laugh, the sound of it. The rough, delighted bark of it in the kitchen at Grimmauld Place, the thing the stone had shown him not 3 minutes before, clear and whole. He reached for it and it was not there. He could remember that Sirius had laughed. He could remember standing in the kitchen and being warmed by it. He could remember in words that it had been rough and delighted and alive. But the sound itself, the actual grain and pitch and life of it, the thing that was not a fact about the laugh but the laugh itself, had been taken, carried down to the shore with the fragment as the ferryman's coin, and it was gone and it was not coming back, and no describing of it would ever rebuild it, because you cannot rebuild a sound out of adjectives. He knelt in the ruined house and reached again and again for the empty socket where the sound had been, and each time found only the words about it, the photograph of it, the fact without the thing, and he understood coldly and completely what death had meant. Not blood, not years, a warmth, a belonging, the small human thing you do not miss until you reach for it and find the place empty. He had refused to call his godfather back from the doorway of death to keep him company, and the price of that whole clean refusal of the unmaking he had done in the same breath was that he would now never again hear the man laugh, not even in the safe country of his own memory. The dead were at rest, and Harry had just paid to keep them there and to close the second door of the 8, the last living scrap of the sound of one of them. He did not make a sound. He knelt over the box with the inert gold cooling in his hand, the fragment gone, the stone gone dark, the cracked black face of it just a stone now, a dead thing, a relic that would never call anyone to any doorway again. And after a while he became aware that Dumbledore had crossed the room, breaking no promise, because the promise had been to stand back while the danger lasted and the danger was over, and the old man was on one knee beside him in the starlight, not touching near. "I do not know what you did," Dumbledore said, very low. "I saw the box open and the curse strike you and break. I saw you kneel there a long time speaking to something I could not see. I saw you take the ring, and I saw a thing pass through you that made the whole room go cold, and I saw it go wherever it went, and I saw the ring go dead in your hand. I do not know the name of any of it, but I know grief when I am sitting beside it, Harry. I have sat beside a great deal of it in my life, most of it my own doing. And I know that you paid something just now that I did not see and cannot see, and that it was dear, and that you paid it without a word of complaint, and I find," the old voice roughened and steadied, "I find that I am ashamed a little that I have spent this whole year teaching you the theory of Horcruxes as though it were a puzzle when it is this, when the price of it is this." "You couldn't have known," Harry said. He looked at the dead stone in his hand. "Neither could I. He told me there'd be a price. He didn't tell me what. That's part of it. You don't get to choose which warmth it takes. If you could choose, you'd give it something you didn't want. It takes what you'd miss. That's the whole point. That's what makes it a price." He turned the ring over. The gold was only gold. The stone was only stone, cracked, carved with an old family's mark, empty of everything now. "I could have called them back, my mum and dad. Sirius, the stone would have let me. That's what it does, this stone. I think it calls the dead to the edge. And I didn't. And the price for not doing it and for doing the other thing in the same breath is that I can't hear him laugh anymore, anywhere, not even in my own head." He closed his hand around the dead ring. "I want you to know that, and I want you to never tell anyone. And I want you to understand that I'd do it again, tonight, right now, exactly the same, because there are 5 more of these in the world, and a piece behind my own eyes, and a man walking around inside a body he thinks he can't lose, and every one of them is a door he's holding open, and I'm the only hand that can close them. So that's the price. Now you've seen it. Please don't ever ask me to let you carry it." Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment in the starlight, and then he did a thing Harry had never seen him do and would see him do only once more before the end. He bowed his head, the whole silver weight of it, and he put his whole unburned right hand flat over his own heart, and he said in a voice gone entirely to gravel, "I will never ask you again. And I will carry the fact of what you carry, which is the only part of it you have left me to carry, for the rest of the days I have, and I have fewer than I have let anyone believe, and I will spend them at your side and not in your way. That is my promise. It is worth less than yours. It is all I have." They knelt together in the ruined house, the old man dying by a slower measure than he had let on, the child dying by no measure at all but changed with every door he closed, and outside the single window the ordinary stars wheeled on indifferent, and the summer night went toward morning. After a while Harry stood. His legs held, they always held now, whatever was taken, because a vessel that is being emptied by degrees still stands as long as the walls of it are whole, and his walls were whole and would be for a long time yet. He put the dead ring in his pocket, because a thing that had held a piece of a soul and now held nothing was still a Peveril heirloom and still a hallow, whatever a hallow was, and he had a sense, not yet a knowledge, that it would matter later. He looked to the north again, past the walls of the house, out over the sleeping country, and let the sight come up, and the constellation was 1 star per now. 4 coals out in the world where there had been 5. And the nearest of the 4 was far off to the south and east, low and cold and strange, sunk in a place that felt of salt and stone and deep water, guarded, he could tell even at this distance, by something worse than a curse built out of family spite. Something that had been made to be cruel to the living in a way the ring had not. "There's another," he said, "south and east, by the sea, and it's worse. This one was hidden in pride, in the last place he thought anyone would look. That one's hidden in cruelty. He built it so that getting to it would cost someone something before they even reached it. I can feel that much from here." He looked at Dumbledore. "I'm going to need to know everything you found out about a cave. A cave by the sea, somewhere he'd have been as a child, somewhere that frightened other children. Because that's where the next one is, and he'll have made me pay a toll at the door, and I'd rather know the shape of the toll before I'm standing in the dark with the water rising." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment, this child who spoke of caves he had not been told of and tolls he could not yet have imagined, and something moved behind the tired blue eyes that was not quite hope, because hope was too warm a word for it, but that sat beside hope and did the same work. He got to his feet slowly, an old man's rising, and he held out his unburned hand, and Harry took it, and let himself be helped up, though he did not need the help, because he understood that the old man needed to give it. "A cave," Dumbledore said, "by the sea. There is an orphanage record and a seaside trip and a boy who did something to 2 other children in a cave that they would never afterward speak of." His hand tightened on Harry's once and let go. "I have been afraid of that cave for a year without knowing why. Come. The night is spent, and we have a great deal to read before we go down into the dark, and I find, Harry, that I would rather go down into it with you than up into the light with anyone else alive." They left the ruined house together, out past the dead snake rotting over the door, down the black shoulder of the hill toward the sleeping village and the leaning stone reaper standing guard over an empty grave. And behind them the front room settled back into its long ruin with one flagstone lifted and an empty box open to the starlight, and a curse spent against a wall it had never been built to strike. 3 days later, in the round office at the top of the school where the silver instruments turned and the portraits pretended to doze, Dumbledore drew a memory out of his own head on the tip of his wand, a thin silver thread of it, and let it fall into the stone basin, and the surface went to smoke, and the 2 of them bent over it and fell in. They came down on a shingle beach under a gray sky with a cold wind coming off a colder sea. A cliff rose to their right, black rock streaked with the white of gulls, and at its foot the tide sucked in and out of a low dark mouth in the stone, a sea cave half drowned, breathing. On the shingle stood 3 children in the drab wool of an orphanage on an outing. 2 of them, a boy and a girl, stood too still, the way small animals stand when a larger one has decided something about them. And the third stood a little apart, thin and dark and self-possessed past his years, watching the cave mouth with the particular hunger of a person who has found a thing that belongs to him and does not yet know why. He was 11, Dumbledore said beside Harry, his voice pitched low though the memory could not hear them. This was the summer before I came to the orphanage to tell him what he was. He took those 2 children into that cave, Amy Benson and Dennis Bishop, and something happened in the dark that neither of them would ever describe, not to the matron, not to each other, not for the rest of their lives. They came out changed. He came out satisfied. He never told anyone what he did, and I have never learned it, and I have concluded that the not telling was the whole of the point. He learned that summer that he could take a thing from another person in the dark and keep it, and that the keeping made him larger. He learned it here in this cave at 11 years before he learned to tear a soul. This is where it started. This is the shape of him before there were any spells on it. Harry watched the thin dark boy on the shingle watch the cave, and he did not look at him with hatred, because hatred was a warmth he could no longer afford to spend, and he did not look at him with pity, because pity was a lie. He looked at him as he now looked at all things from the edges in, hunting the assumption. He picked this place, Harry said slowly. Later. When he had something to hide that mattered more than anything, he came back here, to the one place in the world where he first found out he could be cruel in the dark and get away with it. He didn't hide the ring where he was proud. He hid this one where he was formed. That tells me something about how he'll have guarded it. He straightened as the memory began to thin at its edges. Pride guards a thing by putting it where no one would think to look. Cruelty guards a thing by making sure that everyone who reaches it suffers first. The ring was a landmine for one hand. This will be a toll gate, and the toll will be paid in the one currency he learned to collect on this beach. He'll make whoever comes here give something up in the dark before he lets them near it. Pain, or a memory, or a life, probably all 3. They rose up out of the basin into the turning silver quiet of the office, and Dumbledore looked at Harry across the smoking stone with the old tired eyes, and did not tell him he was wrong because he was not wrong, and the not telling was its own confirmation. There is a boat, Dumbledore said. I have found that much in a year of reading around the edges of a thing I could not name. A boat and a black lake under the cliff, and a payment demanded at the shore of it, and something in the water that a wise man does not disturb. And at the heart of the lake an island, and on the island a basin, and in the basin the treasure lies under a draught that cannot be vanished and cannot be poured away and cannot be pushed aside, but only drunk to the last measure by whoever would reach the thing beneath it. I do not yet know what the draught does to the one who drinks it. I know only that he brewed it, and that he brews nothing kind, and that a potion built to guard a soul fragment by a man who learned cruelty in that cave will not simply kill. It will do worse and slower, and it will save the killing for the water. I had meant to go alone. I had meant to pay the toll myself, whatever it proved to be, because I am old and have spent most of what I was going to spend, and a life mostly spent is the cheapest coin there is. He looked at Harry's hand, the one that had opened a box and broken a curse and closed around a ring, and something moved in his face. I am no longer permitted to think that way, I find. You have made it very difficult for me to go on believing that the cheapest thing to spend is myself. Good, Harry said, stop believing it. Because I'm going to need you alive to get me to the boat, and I'm going to need you standing when whatever's in the water comes up, and I can't unmake a piece of his soul and keep an old man from drowning at the same time. So we go together and we go careful, and nobody spends anything they don't have to. He almost smiled and did not, because the muscles for it felt far away. You taught me that, constant vigilance, wrong teacher, right lesson. But there was a thing gnawing at the edge of the plan, and Harry turned it over in the turning silver quiet of the office before he let himself sleep on it. The ring's curse had been built out of the threat of death, and the shore had made him deaf to that threat, and so the curse had broken against him and done nothing. The potion in the basin was not built out of death. Dumbledore had said as much without knowing what he was saying. It was built out of despair, out of the drinker's own worst self poured back down his throat, and despair was not a thing the shore had made Harry deaf to. He could break any trap whose strength was the promise of ending, because ending was where he already stood. He could not break a trap whose strength was the promise of remembering. The cave had a jaw for each half of a person, exactly as the ring had, and this time the half the shore protected was not the half that would be bitten. That was worth knowing before he was standing in the dark with a goblet in his hand and the water beginning to move. That night Harry slept in a tower room the school kept for him, and the shore came up to meet him before the dream could form. He stood on it, the endless soft murmur going out into the dark that had no edges, the cold tide coming in over his feet without wetting them, and the figure was there, tall past comfort, folded in its wing dark, the vast patient attention settling over him like weather. You refused the stone, Death said. I felt you refuse it. Do you know how rarely a hand that could call its beloved dead back to the doorway chooses not to? I have watched the living for the whole age of the world, and I could count the ones who refused that offer on the fingers of one of the hands I do not have. You refused it, and then you paid the price of the refusing and the unmaking together, and you did not once try to bargain the price down, and I want you to understand that this is why you and he are not the same, though you are both spending souls to do what you do. He would have turned the stone. He turned everything. He never in his life met a door he did not open, and that is precisely why every door he opened cost him more than it gave, until he had opened himself 8 ways and called it strength. I can't hear him laugh anymore, Harry said. Sirius, that's what it took. I know what it took. I was there. I am always there. The pale hands did not move, and the attention behind them sharpened. It took the sound of a laugh, because the sound of a laugh was the dearest small living thing you were carrying, and the price is always the dearest small thing, never the useful thing, never the thing you would gladly give. You will not get it back. I will not insult you by pretending otherwise, but hear this, because it is the nearest thing to comfort I am able to hand you, and I hand it to you not as comfort but as fact. The man himself at my shore laughs still. The sound is not gone from the world. It is only gone from you. You spent your copy of it. His is safe where he is, and when your hour comes and you walk in off the shore of your own accord, you will hear it again whole, the first thing you hear. You have not lost the laugh. You have posted it ahead of you. There is a difference, and you are one of the few who will ever be able to feel it. Harry stood with the cold tide coming in and did not answer for a while, and the shore let him not answer because it had all the time there was. The cave, he said at last. Tell me what's in the water. The drowned. The word fell into the murmur and silenced it. He went down into that black lake, and he pulled up the dead that the sea and the years had given me, the bodies of the lost, and he bound them with his magic and set them to guard his treasure, and he made of them a thing your world calls in fairy, corpses that walk and drag and drown at a dead man's command. Understand what that is. Understand it fully, because it will help you when you are standing in the dark with them coming up out of the water. The great stillness deepened, and the cold that had never once been warm went colder, and for the second time since the ministry Harry felt the thing move through it that was not anger and was worse. They are mine, every one of them. They paid their debt, they reached my shore, they were gathered and made whole and set free, and he went down and tore them back out of their rest and nailed them into their rotted flesh again and set them to work, slaves in the bodies they had already laid down. It is the same crime as the Horcrux worked on other people's souls instead of his own. He denies me the living by refusing his own death, and he denies me the dead by dragging theirs back to labor. When you go into that cave, you will not only be closing a door, you will be freeing a drowned congregation that has been held from its rest for 60 years. Do not fight the Inferi as enemies. They are not your enemies. They are my stolen children, and the fire you will need to hold them back is a mercy to them, not a weapon against them, and when the piece of him in that cave goes down to the shore, they will go down with it, all of them finally home. Go in remembering that. It will steady your hand when the water is rising and the cold hands are on you, and everything in you wants to call it terror. It is not terror, it is a rescue. Now wake and read and go carefully, and do not let the old man pay a single coin you can pay for him. He has posted enough ahead of himself already. Harry woke in the tower room with the gray of another morning at the window and the murmur at the edge of hearing, and the dead ring on the table where he had left it, gold and stone and empty. And far to the south and east, under a cliff over a black lake, a second cold star turned in its cruel dark, and the drowned turned in their sleep beneath it, and waited, without knowing they were waiting, for a hand that could set them free. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. The black lake before the cave there was the burrow, and the burrow was the last warm room Harry would ever sit in and know that he was warm. He did not understand that yet, sitting at the scrubbed kitchen table on a bright August morning with the garden loud with gnomes and the smell of frying coming off the stove, Mrs. Weasley moving between the pans in the sink with 4 things cooking and none of them burning. He only knew that the room was good, and that the goodness was thinning at the edges the way the smell of the Sunday roast had thinned, and that he could still, if he sat very still and did not reach too hard, feel the heat of the kitchen on his face and mean it. He held on to that. He had learned to hold on to the ordinary warmths while he still had them, because he was learning one door at a time that they did not grow back. Ron sat across from him with a mountain of toast and a running commentary on the canon's disastrous summer, and it was easy and it was familiar, and it was a lie by omission the size of a country, and Ron did not know it. Hermione knew it. Hermione had known it since Harry came down the crooked stairs on the first morning 3 days ago, and she had said nothing across 3 days of watching, and now she sat beside Ron with a book she was not reading and her eyes on Harry's face, and Harry could feel the question building in her the way you feel whether. "You've got quiet," she said at last, when Ron had gone out to help George with something that would probably explode. She kept her voice low and level, the voice she used for problems she meant to solve. "Not sad quiet, I know sad quiet, we all went sad quiet after June. This is different, you look at things now like you're reading them. You looked at Mrs. Weasley's clock this morning, the one with all our hands on it, and you went somewhere for a second, and when you came back you looked at me like you weren't sure I was still there. What happened to you, Harry? And don't say nothing, I've done nothing, this isn't nothing." Harry looked at her, this girl who had walked into every fire beside him since they were 11, who had never once been wrong about a thing that mattered, and he weighed for a moment telling her. He waited and set it down because he had set it down with Dumbledore and it had not gotten lighter since. There was no halfway with the mark. You either carried the whole of it alone or you handed it to someone who loved you and watched them try to lift a thing that would break their back, and he loved her too much to hand it to her. Something did happen, he said, because she would know a flat lie and it would cost him more than the truth. At the ministry, not the part everyone saw, something after. I can't tell you what, and it isn't because I don't trust you, it's the opposite. It's because if I tell you, you'll try to help me carry it, and it can't be carried by more than one person, and I'm the one it was given to. I need you to believe me that this is true, and I need you to not ask me again, and I need you to know that you not asking is going to be one of the hardest things anyone ever does for me, and that I'll know it every time you don't ask, and that it'll be the thing that keeps me human when the rest of it stops trying. He reached across the table, which was not a thing he did, and put his hand over her book. Can you do that? Can you be the person who knows there's a thing and loves me enough not to reach for it? Hermione looked at him for a long moment, and her eyes were bright, and she did not cry because she was made of sterner things than that, and at the end of the moment she turned her hand over under his and gripped it hard once and let go. All right, she said unsteadily. All right, but I'm going to be watching. And if I ever think the thing is winning, if I ever think whatever this is taking more of you than you can spare, I'm not going to keep quiet then. I don't care what I promised. I'll get in its way. You should know that about me before you decide I'm safe. I'm counting on it, Harry said, and meant it entirely, and understood saying it, that Hermione Granger getting in the way of the thing that was eating him might turn out to be the only railing on the whole staircase down. Mrs. Weasley put breakfast in front of him then, an enormous plate of it, and cupped the back of his head with one flour-dusted hand as she set it down. The unthinking tenderness she gave all her children and had long since decided Harry was, and Harry felt it, the warmth of the hand, the being someone's, and he closed his eyes for a second and drank it while it was still a thing he could taste. He did not know it was the last time. He would reach for the memory of that warmth in a boat on a black lake within the week and find the place where it had been swept clean, and he would understand then that he ought to have held it longer. But no one is told which warmth is the last one. That is a mercy and it is a cruelty, and it is the same thing wearing two faces, and it is the price of being alive at all, which even the unmarked pay in the end in their own slower coin. Dumbledore came for him that evening out of the blue dusk with his silver hair and his ruined that was not true in hand. And Mrs. Weasley fussed and Ron protested and Hermione said nothing and watched. And Harry took up the small bag he had never fully unpacked and went out to the gate where the old man waited, and the burrow glowed behind him, gold in every window, the last warm room, and he did not look back at it for long, because he had learned the first rule of the country he belonged to, which was that you did not look back at the things you were leaving unless you meant to stay. They came to the cliff at the turn of the tide in the last of a green evening, and the sea was the color of slate and moved like something breathing in its sleep. Dumbledore had brought them down by a means Harry did not fully follow, a long thread of apparition and then a walk along a headland where the grass gave way to bare black rock, and then the two of them stood at the top of a cliff with the sea sucking at its foot 100 feet below, and there was no beach, and no path, and no way down that a living body was meant to take. The wind came off the water with salt in it and something older under the salt, the cold mineral breath of a place the sun had never properly reached. Out on the face of the sight, close now, close enough to ache, the cold star burned under the cliff, sunk in the dark behind the wall of stone, and its pull was a rope with a weight on the end of it, and Harry leaned into the wind and let it draw him toward the edge and did not fall because the mark held him upright as it always did now, a vessel filling rather than a body falling. There is a fissure, Dumbledore said, close to his ear against the wind, below the waterline. He will have made himself swim to it as a boy to prove that he could, and made the two orphanage children swim it to prove that he could make them. I am too old to swim a drowning gap in a cold sea, and you are too valuable to lose to a cramp in the dark, so we will go the way that is beneath his dignity, which is to say we will go the easy way, because he could never once in his life imagine that anyone would choose the easy way over the frightening one. The old man raised his unburned hand, and the cliff face below them shivered, and a seam of dark opened in the wet rock, a low arch above a ledge the sea had not quite claimed. After you, I think, your compass, not mine. They went down a stair the cliff made for them, slick and narrow, and in through the arch into a passage that stank of weed and salt and cold, and the sea sound folded away behind them and became a drip and a hush, and then at the end of the passage an opening, and beyond the opening a space so large that Harry's light lost itself before it found a far wall. The lake lay before them, black and utterly still, so still that it did not look like water at all but like a floor of polished obsidian, and it went out into a dark that swallowed Dumbledore's wand-light whole. Far out at what might have been the center of it, there was the faintest smudge of green, a low island with a point of pale light on it, and under the island to the sight burned the cold star, close now, so close that Harry could feel its turning against the turning of the piece behind his own eyes, two needles that hated each other reaching across black water. There's a toll at the door, Harry said. He crouched at the edge of the lake where the black water met the stone and studied the place from the edges in. You said a payment, he'd have made it blood. It's always blood with him, blood and cruelty, because those are the two things he learned to take from people before he learned anything else. He wants whoever comes here to open a vein at the threshold, to pay in the one currency he collects. He looked at his own left hand, the marked one, and then at the stone lip of the lake, and found what he was looking for, a place where the rock had been worked, a shallow basin cut into the stone and stained a color the dark almost hid. Here you bleed here, and the payment lets you take the boat. And he'll have set it so the wound is the point, so that you arrive at the island already weaker, already having given something up. That's how he guards a thing. He makes you poorer before you're even in the door. Then let me pay it, Dumbledore said. It is only blood and I have. No, it was not sharp, it was only final, the flat certainty the shore lent him. Every coin I can pay for you I pay. You said it yourself up on the cliff when you stopped believing the cheapest thing to spend was you. It's mine to spend here, watch. He drew the small knife Dumbledore had brought, and set the edge to the meat of his marked palm, and paid the toll, and it was only blood. And it ran into the cut basin in the stone, and the black lake accepted it, and out on the still water something answered. A green light kindled deep under the surface, and a chain came up out of the depths on its own, rising, coiling, dragging, and at the end of the chain a boat surfaced, small and ghostly and greenlit, riding the black water without a ripple, and it drifted in toward the shore to carry its toll payers out to the island where the treasure and the drowned both waited. The boat would take two, Harry judged, or take one and drag. The enchantment on it measured something weight or worth or the size of the magic a body carried, and he did not test it beyond what he had to. They stepped down into it together, the old man and the marked one, and it bore them without protest, and it moved out onto the black lake of its own slow accord, and the drip and the hush closed over them, and the green smudge of the island grew. Harry looked down into the water as they crossed. He should not have. He knew distantly that he should not have, and he did it anyway because the sight would not let him do otherwise, and under the black glass of the surface, all around and below the gliding boat, the dead lay waiting. Pale shapes, hundreds of them, thousands, drifting suspended in the cold at every depth the eye could reach and further down into a dark the eye could not, men and women and children with the years and the water worn into them, their eyes open, their hands loose, held from their rest by a dead man's magic and set to guard his treasure in the deep. They did not move, not yet. They floated in the black lake in their stolen sleep, and Harry looked down at the drowned congregation that death had called its stolen children, and he understood, crossing over them in a green boat with a fresh cut in his hand, that he had not come here only to close a door. He had come to open a great many others. The murmur that lived in the mark rose while he looked, the low endless tide of the dead, and for once he did not push it back to the edge of hearing but let it come because these were the ones it was speaking for. He could not make out words, he never could, but the pitch of it changed as the boat glided over the deep, and he understood the change without being told, the way you understand a room has been holding its breath. The drowned knew him, not as Harry, as the hand. 60 years they had hung in the cold under a dead man's binding, denied the shore, denied the rest they had earned and been given and had torn from them. And now something had come across the black water that smelled of the tide they had lost, and every one of them that could still dream was dreaming in the deep of a door. He sat very still in the green boat with Dumbledore's shoulder against his and did not tell the old man what the water was thinking, because there were no words for it that would not sound like madness, and because some things are not for telling but only for doing. He would do this one. Whatever else the night took from him, he would do this one and do it whole. The island was a low disk of dark rock barely above the waterline, and at its center stood a stone basin on a stone plinth waist high, and in the basin was a light. A green light, faint and terrible, welling up out of a liquid that filled the basin to its brim, and under the liquid at the bottom of it a dark shape lay drowned in the emerald glow, and the cold star burned inside the shape, turning close, so close now that Harry's whole left arm ached with the pull of it. He looked into the basin, and the sight told him what he needed to know and what he had half hoped it would not. The fragment was here, truly here, not a decoy, not a memory. A piece of Tom Riddle lay drowned under the green draught at the bottom of the basin, and there was no reaching it around the liquid and no vanishing the liquid and no pushing it aside. The draught cannot be moved, only drunk. That was the shape of the trap, that had always been the shape of it, and Harry had known since the office 3 nights ago that the drinking was the toll and that the toll could not be paid by the marked half of him. I have to drink it, he said, all of it. To empty the basin, to reach the thing at the bottom. That's the guard, not a curse, not a lock, a draft, and the only way past it is through it, and it goes down the throat of whoever comes here and does the work the man learned to do in this cave when he was 11. It takes something out of you in the dark and keeps it. He looked at the green light welling in the basin and then at the old man. And here's the part you're not going to like. It can't be you, not because of the promise, because of what I am. I can walk through anything he built out of the threat of death, because death is where I already stand. This isn't built out of death, it's built out of despair, out of a person's own worst self poured back down their throat, and the shore doesn't make me deaf to that. There's no protection in me against this one. Which means if either of us drinks it, we drink it as ourselves, with everything it's going to do, and between the two of us I'm the one who can afford to come out the far side of it wrecked and keep working, and you are not. So, I drink, you keep me drinking when I beg you to stop, because I will beg you to stop, and you don't. Dumbledore looked at him across the greenlit basin, and the century of him, all the terrible, lonely wisdom of it, rose up in his face and did battle with itself. And Harry watched the old man understand that he was being asked to do the cruelest thing anyone had ever asked of him, which was to pour despair down the throat of a child and refuse the child's pleading, and to do it as an act of love because the alternative was worse. I have done many things I am not proud of, Dumbledore said very quietly. I did not think there was a new one left for me to do. Give me the goblet, Harry, and forgive me in advance for every word I am about to refuse you. Harry conjured a goblet and dipped it into the green light and drank. The first measure was only bitter, cold, and wrong, the taste of a thing never meant to pass a living throat. The second measure took the cave away. He was small again, and the cupboard was dark, and the door was shut, and no one was coming, no one had ever come. No one was ever going to come, and the certainty of it was total, was the only true thing in a world of lies, that he was alone and had always been alone, and that everyone who had ever seemed to love him had been mistaken or lying or was already gone. He heard himself make a sound. He drank the third measure because a hand he could not see was tipping the goblet to his mouth. And the third measure showed him the green light in the cottage and his mother's voice going out of the world. And the fourth showed him the graveyard and Cedric folded on the ground. And the fifth showed him the veil, breathing, and Sirius slipping behind it without a splash. And he was reaching, he was always reaching, he never reached in time. And then the draft stopped showing him what he had already lost and began to show him what he would become, which was worse than any grief in the past, because it was a grief still ahead of him and coming. It showed him a room lit and full, everyone he loved in it and laughing, Ron and Hermione and the whole gold-windowed warmth of the burrow, and himself standing in the middle of it, able to see every face and feel not one of them, a cold thing wearing a boy's shape at a table it had stopped belonging to, and the potion whispered gently in a voice that was almost kind that this was the true end of the road. That he would close every door and free every drowned stranger and win the whole grinding war and stand at the finish of it unable to feel the arms of a single living person who still loved him, and that no one had made him do it, and that he had said yes with his eyes open, one warmth at a time, and would go on saying it until there was nothing warm left in him to spend. He begged the hand to stop. He said please, and he said no more, and he said you're killing me, and the hand did not stop. The hand held to a promise made over a greenlit basin, and it tipped the goblet again, and the sixth measure was thirst. Not the potion's visions, thirst. A thirst that opened in him like a wound and demanded water, any water, and there was water all around. A whole black lake of it, and every animal instinct he had left screamed at him to crawl to the edge of the island and drink. And some cold surviving splinter of him that the shore had left standing knew that to reach for that water was to call up everything that slept beneath it. He drank the last measure of the green draught instead, forced past his ruined throat by a hand that loved him enough to be merciless, and the basin was empty and the dark shape lay revealed at the bottom of it. A heavy golden locket with a serpentine S worked on its face in green stones, and the cold star burned inside it, and Harry lay on the wet rock of the island with the whole of his despair wrung out of him and spread on the stone and reached up and took the locket in his marked hand. And the water moved. It began at the edges, a stirring, a loss of that terrible stillness, and then all across the black lake the surface broke and the drowned came up. They rose in their hundreds, pale and streaming, the men and the women and the small ones, the sea and the years worn into them, their open eyes catching the green light. And they came toward the island through the water and up out of it onto the rock, cold hands reaching. A whole congregation of the enslaved dead converging on the two living warmths at the center of their prison, doing the one thing the dead man had bound them to do, which was to drag down into the black water anything that reached the treasure they guarded. It should have been the worst thing Harry had ever seen. A month ago it would have unstrung him, the drowned climbing out of the dark with the water sheeting off their ruined faces and their open eyes fixed on his warmth, hundreds of them, hands like wet rope closing on the air where he stood. But he did not see monsters. That was the gift and the curse of the sight, and here in the green dark it was almost more than he could bear, because where Dumbledore saw an army of corpses and met them with fire, Harry saw the truth of them, which was worse and better both. He saw prisoners. He saw a fisherman with 60 years of the lake in his skin and a wedding ring gone to verdigris on a swollen hand. He saw a woman holding still out of some drowned reflex older than her binding, the shape of a child she had gone into the water to save and had not saved. He saw the small ones. He saw every one of them as a person who had paid the whole debt of a life, reached the shore, been gathered and made whole and set free, and then been torn back out of that freedom by a man who needed unpaid labor for his treasure, and set to guard a locket in the cold for as long as the world should last. They were not attacking him, they were being made to. Every reaching hand was a hand that would have wept, if it had still had the water for weeping, to be doing what it was doing. Dumbledore was on his feet with fire already in his hand, a whip of it, a wheel of it, driving the cold shapes back from the edge of the island, and Harry lying on the stone with the locket clenched in his fist and his throat a ruin and his mind wrung dry, heard under the wet slap of the risen dead and the roar of the old man's fire, the voice of the oldest thing in the world saying a thing it had said to him on a shore that was not a shore. They are not your enemies. They are my stolen children. The fire is a mercy, not a weapon. When the piece of him goes down, they go down with it home. He got up. His legs held. They always held. He stood on the island of black rock with the drowned congregation reaching for him out of the greenlit dark, and he did not raise fire against them because they were not his enemies, and he did not run from them because they were not his to fear. He raised the locket instead high in his marked hand, and he looked out over the risen dead, the cold pale faces, the open eyes, 60 years of stolen rest, and he called the fragment home, and he called them home with it. The shore opened through his hand. The island fell away or stayed exactly where it was and went thin, a painted screen with the true thing pressing behind it. And the true thing was the tide, the endless soft murmur, the cold that had never once been warm, and it poured up out of the depth beneath Harry's palm and reached through the gold for the cold sun drowned in it. The fragment felt the shore take hold and it thrashed, because it was Riddle, and every piece of Riddle carried the whole of his refusal, and it fought and bargained and screamed without a voice and offered Harry the emptying of the basin undone. The despair given back, anything, and Harry held on, and the shore came in, and the fragment was drawn up out of the locket and through the marked hand and down through him to the tide, and the tide closed over it, and it was not broken and it was not burned. It was unmade, given at last the death it had cheated, gathered, closed over, and where it went the drowned followed. It was the most terrible and the most beautiful thing Harry had yet seen, and he would carry the sight of it against the dark for the rest of whatever life the mark left him. As the fragment went down to the shore, the binding that had held the congregation broke, all at once, 60 years of it, and the dead that had been reaching for him with their cold hands stopped reaching. The green light guttered in their open eyes and was replaced by something that was not light and was better than light. A stillness, a letting go, and one by one, and then altogether the drowned turned from the living warmths at the center of their prison and turned toward the shore that had opened through a child's raised hand. And they went down into it, not dragged, not forced, but allowed at last, released into the tide they had been torn from, a whole slow procession of the freed passing through Harry on their way home. He felt every one of them go through him. He felt the cold of them, and under the cold the gratitude of them, wordless, enormous, the gratitude of the long imprisoned for the hand that opens the cell, and it went down with them to the shore and left him standing empty and wrung out and upright on a bare black rock in a suddenly ordinary cave, over a lake that was only a lake now, still and dark, and empty of everything but water. He picked them out as they passed, because the sight would not let him do otherwise, and because he thought someone ought to see them go, ought to witness the freeing the way no one had witnessed the drowning. The fisherman went by him with the verdigris ring on his swollen hand, and the cold of him carried, for the length of the passing, the smell of a boat and a morning and a life before the lake, and then it was gone down to the shore home. The woman with the drowned reflex went by, and Harry felt, in the instant she crossed through him, the moment her arms found at last the child they had been holding the empty shape of for 60 years, felt the two of them go down into the tide together, reunited in the only place reunion is ever truly given, and it was the most terrible mercy he had ever been the instrument of, and he did not look away from it, because to look away would have been to make the freeing about his own comfort. And it was not about him, it had never once been about him. He was only the hand that had been marked, and the hand held still and open while 1,000 of the stolen went home through it, and when the last of them had passed and the green light had gone out of the water for good, he stood alone on the rock in the honest dark and understood that this, and not the ring and not the locket, was the truest shape of the thing he had agreed to be, not a killer of a dark lord. A door held open for the ones he had cheated. The locket in his hand was cold gold, the cold star was gone, and Harry stood on the island and did not make a sound, and Dumbledore let his fire go out, and the two of them stood in the plain dark of a sea cave that was only a sea cave, and for a while neither of them could find anything that a person could say. Then the price came due, and this time it came quietly, without the teaching cruelty of the first, so that Harry almost did not feel the coin go. It was only later in the boat, crossing the water that no longer held anything but water, that he reached for a thing out of the old reflex and found the socket where it had been. He had reached without deciding to for the burrow, for the warmth of it. For the particular thing that had happened to him the first time Molly Weasley had put her arms around him on a station platform and held on longer than a stranger should, the feeling of it, the thing he had privately understood to be the nearest he had ever come to being someone's child. He reached for that warmth to steady himself after the lake, and it was not there. He could remember that Mrs. Weasley had held him. He could remember in words that it had felt like being someone's child. But the warmth itself, the felt fact of the arms and the belonging, had been taken, carried down to the shore with the fragment as the ferryman's coin. And now when he thought of the burrow he thought of a fact about a house, and when Mrs. Weasley next put her arms around him months from now it would register as pressure and weight and kindness observed from a great distance, and not as warmth, never again as warmth. Because he had spent the warmth to free 1,000 drowned strangers and close the third door of the 8. He sat in the greenlit boat with the cold locket in his fist and did not tell Dumbledore what it had taken, because there was no changing it and no sharing it, and the old man, who had poured despair down a child's throat and refused his pleading and would carry that for the rest of his short remaining days, watched Harry's face in the green light and did not ask, because he had learned by now that the not asking was the largest thing he had left to give. Amy Benson and Dennis Bishop, Harry said, when the boat had nearly reached the shore. His voice was wrecked and he let it be wrecked. The two children he took into this cave when he was 11, whatever he did to them in the dark. He learned it here, you said. He learned that he could take a thing from a person in the dark and keep it, and that the keeping made him larger. He looked back out over the still black water where 1,000 of the drowned had just gone home. That's the whole of him in the end. He takes and he keeps, and he thinks the keeping is strength, and it's the opposite of strength. It's just a hole he keeps pouring other people into and calling it a self. And the thing I'm doing, the thing I was chosen for, it's the reverse of it exactly. I take too. I can't pretend I don't. Every one of these takes something out of me, but I give it all down. I don't keep any of it. It goes to the shore and it's gone, and I'm poorer and there's nothing in my hands. He hoards souls and calls it living for. I spend mine and call it in. There he stopped because he did not have the word and did not try to force one. You call it a debt paid, Dumbledore said softly as the boat touched the stone, which is the oldest and the least fashionable kind of courage there is, and the only kind that has ever in the whole history of the world actually held a door shut. Come. There is nothing left in this cave that we came for and a great deal that we did not, and I find I would like very much to be out of it and under an honest sky." Dumbledore said nothing for a while, pulling the ghostly boat back across the water that no longer held anything but water, and when he spoke his voice was very careful, the voice of a man stepping around a wound he cannot see. "There were a great many of them," he said, "in the water. I fought them as an army because that is what my eyes gave me, and it was all I could do to hold the edge of the island. You did not fight them at all. I have been turning it over and I think I begin to understand why, and I find I am glad I did not understand it in the moment, because I do not think I could have stood at the edge with fire in my hand if I had seen what you were seeing." He did not look at Harry as he pulled. "What did you see when they came up out of the dark, if you can say?" "Prisoners," Harry said. "Not monsters, people who paid everything and got taken back out of their rest to work the cold forever. He didn't just cheat death for himself. He enslaved 1,000 strangers to guard a locket, and when the piece of him went down, they went down with it home, all of them, and it was the best thing I've ever been part of and the worst, both, and I don't have a word for a thing that's both, and I've stopped looking for one." He watched the black water slide past. "That's the part he'll never understand, right to the end. He thinks I'm his enemy. I'm not. I'm the thing that comes and lets everyone he's ever chained go free, and he's just the last and biggest of the chains." They climbed the stair the cliff had made out through the low arch into a night that had come on while they were under the earth, and the sea moved below in its sleep, and the stars wheeled overhead, ordinary and cold and free. And Harry stood on the black rock of the headland with the wind off the water taking the cave stink out of his clothes, and let the sight come up one more time before he let himself be tired and counted. 3 coals now, out in the world, where 5 had burned a month ago. And of the 3, 2 hung close together, far to the north and east, back toward the country he knew, one of them low and deep behind layers of old goblin magic and stone that made his eyes water to look at, sunk in a vault under a bank, and the other high and strange and near, so near it startled him, hidden in a place he had walked past 1,000 times without ever once suspecting, a place full of the lost and forgotten things of 1,000 years of children. A room he had been inside and never truly seen, a cup in a vault, a crown in a school, and the third of the 3 hung out beyond them, coiled and moving, warm where the others were cold, a thing that was not an object at all but a living creature, a serpent close to the man himself, the last guard before the last door, and behind his own eyes, patient, sleeping apart from all the rest, the piece he carried in his own skull. 2 of them are almost home," Harry said. "One's in a vault at Gringotts, buried under more curses than the ring and the cave put together, and getting to it is going to be less like a hunt and more like a robbery. And the other one," he almost laughed, and the muscles for it were far away but nearer than they had been in the ruined house, because there was a bleak wonder in it that even the mark could not take from him, "the other one's at Hogwarts. It's been at Hogwarts the whole time. He hid a piece of his soul inside the school in a room I've stood in, and no one has ever found it because no one has ever looked at that room and seen what it was hiding. He put a piece of himself in the one place in the world he ever called home, the same as I'd have done, the same as anyone would, and it's been sitting there through every year I've walked those halls, and I never felt it until now." Dumbledore looked at him under the free and ordinary stars, this child who saw crowns in schools and cups in vaults and serpents coiled at the side of the enemy, and whatever moved behind the tired blue eyes was too old and too sad to be called hope, but it stood where hope would stand. "Then we go home," the old man said, "to the school and the vault and the last of it. Take my arm, Harry. The night is old and we have 4 doors left to close, and I find, God help me, that I am no longer certain I will live to see the last of them shut, but I will see the next one and the one after that, and I will spend every day I have left standing at your back while you do the thing that only you can do. Take my arm, let us go home." Harry took the old man's arm, and the headland folded, and the sea and the free stars and the cave full of a lake that was only a lake now fell away behind them. And somewhere to the north 2 cold stars burned on in a vault in a school, and did not yet know that the hand had already crossed a black lake and come back up into the air, carrying an empty locket and 1,000 freed strangers and a warmth it would never feel again. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. The cup and the crown. The school took Harry back in September as though nothing in him had changed, and everything in him had changed, and the not being noticed was its own strange grief. He walked the halls he had walked for 5 years, and they were only halls now. The stone that had seemed once to breathe with 1,000 years of magic was only stone. The moving stairs were machinery. The enchanted ceiling of the great hall was a ceiling with a spell on it. He knew in words that he had once found this place wondrous, that he had come off the boats at 11 with his chest full of a thing there was no name for, and the words were all he had now, the fact of the wonder without the wonder itself, because the mark charged its standing rent, and the rent was paid in exactly the things a person would miss. He did not tell anyone. He sat at the Gryffindor table between Ron and Hermione and ate what was put in front of him and answered when he was spoken to, and Hermione watched him across the pumpkin juice with her promise held between her teeth, not asking, and Ron, who noticed less and loved no less for it, filled the silence with Quidditch and was a mercy without knowing it. There was a crown in the castle. Harry had felt it the moment the carriages came up the drive, high and strange and near, burning to the sight somewhere above and to the east in the part of the school where things went to be forgotten. He had walked past it 100 times, everyone had. That was the whole terrible cleverness of it. Riddle had not buried this fragment in pride like the ring or drowned it in cruelty like the locket. He had hidden it in plain sight in the one room in the school that hides itself, and trusted the castle's own forgetfulness to guard it, and it had for 50 years. I need you to help me find a room, Harry told Hermione 2 nights after the start of term, in a corner of the common room with the fire low and the last of the older students gone up to bed. He had decided to give her this much because it could be given without the whole weight coming with it, and because doing a thing entirely alone was a habit he did not want to let harden all the way through. The room of requirement, the version of it where things get hidden. People have been stuffing things in there for 1,000 years and forgetting them. I need to get in, and I need to find one particular object in a room the size of a cathedral packed to the rafters with junk, and I can't tell you why it matters, only that it does, more than anything I've ever asked you for. Hermione looked at him for a moment over the low fire, and he watched her decide not to ask the question she was allowed not to ask, and watch what it cost her. You walk past the wall 3 times, she said, thinking about what you need. I read about it after the DA. If you're looking for the place where things are hidden, you think about hiding something. But Harry, she stopped and started again, level the voice for problems. If it's in there, and it's the kind of thing I think it is, from the kind of trouble you've been in all this quiet secret summer, then it isn't going to want to be found, and finding it isn't going to be the hard part. Getting it out of you afterward is going to be the hard part. I'll help you find the room. I won't help you carry whatever it does to you because you won't let me, and I've decided to be angry about that later when there's time. Tonight I'll just find you the door. They went up together in the small hours, Ron trailing behind with the Marauder's map and his wand lit low, and Harry walked the blank stretch of wall on the 7th floor 3 times with the thought of hidden things held steady in his mind, and the door grew out of the stone and they went in. The room of hidden things was a city of the forgotten. It rose in aisles and cliffs and toppling towers of everything 1,000 years of children had ever needed to lose, broken furniture and dying spellbooks and cabinets and cages and bottles, and the debris of 10,000 small crimes and secrets, stretching away into a dusty dark that swallowed the wand-light whole. And high up, far in, burning to the sight above the tideline of the junk, the crown turned cold and patient, a small star hidden in a mountain of the meaningless. Wait by the door, Harry said. Both of you, whatever you see, whatever it looks like it's doing to me, you wait by the door and you don't come in after me. Promise me the way you promised Dumbledore, I mean it. This is the price of my letting you find the room at all. They promised, Hermione tight-lipped and Ron pale, and Harry went up into the mountain alone. The room of hidden things had a smell to it, dust and old varnish and the particular staleness of air that has been shut in with abandoned things for centuries. And it had a sound too, or the absence of one, a held silence broken only by Harry's own steps and the far-off settling creak of the piled towers shifting under their own weight. He climbed through the wreckage of 1,000 years of adolescence, and the sight showed him as he went the faint used-up glow that clings to objects that have mattered to someone. A love letter folded into a locket, a cheating quill snapped in half and hidden in shame, a bottle of something that had cost a boy his place at the school, 100 small human secrets stacked to the ceiling and forgotten. It was, he thought, climbing the most honest room in the castle, because it was where the school kept the truth about the people it raised, the fear and the vanity and the little crimes, all of it stuffed out of sight and left to gather dust while the corridors below pretended at innocence. And Riddle had understood that. Riddle had looked at the one room that held the whole unglamorous truth of Hogwarts, and had known it was the safest place in Britain to hide a piece of a soul, because no one ever goes looking for treasure in the place they have chosen to forget. He found it as he found all of them now, not by searching but by leaning, letting the pull take him, up a canyon of stacked chairs and along a shelf of dead clocks, and over a hill of scorched books to a battered cabinet where someone, half a century ago, had set a tarnished tiara on the head of a chipped stone bust and walked away and forgotten it forever. It was old silver gone black, and it was set with a great oval sapphire and worked with words in a script worn almost to nothing. Wit beyond measure is man's greatest treasure, and the cold star burned inside it, turning, and it felt Harry coming, and it hated him because it was Riddle, and it did the only thing it could, which was pull and want and reach. This one did not fight the way the others had, it bargained. It was the cleverest of the fragments, hidden in the cleverest place, made from a piece of a man at the height of his cleverness, and it did not thrash or threat, it reasoned. As Harry lifted it from the dead stone head, it spoke into the back of his mind in a voice that was almost gentle, almost reasonable, the voice of the thin, dark boy on the shingle beach grown into something that believed itself wise. You could keep me, it said. You have the sight, you have the mark. You could set me somewhere clever and let me teach you what I know, and I know a great deal. I know things the old man never learned and never will. I know how to keep a warmth from being taken. I know how to spend a soul without going poor. You are throwing away your only advantage. You unmake us one by one and pay for each of us and arrive at the end of it hollowed out and alone. And it need not be so, it need not be so. Keep just this one, the cleverest one, and I will show you how to have everything you have lost given back. No, Harry said aloud in the dust and the dark, and the word was flat and final and entirely without temptation. Because he had learned in the ruined house that the fragments always offered the one thing you wanted, and that the wanting was the trap and not the offer. You don't know how to keep a warmth from being taken. You only know how to take other people's. That's the whole of your cleverness, and it's why you ended up as 8 holes in the world wearing a crown in a junk room. Go home. He closed his marked hand around the black silver and he called it home. The shore opened through his hand. The mountain of forgotten things went thin, a painted screen with the tide pressing behind it, and the cold that had never once been warm poured up out of the depth beneath his palm and reached through the tarnished silver for the cold sun hidden in it. And the clever fragment, feeling the shore take hold, did the thing the clever always do when reasoning fails, which was to panic. And its panic was worse than the other's rage because it understood in its clever torn way exactly what was happening to it, understood that it was being not destroyed but unmade given the death it had spent everything to cheat, and it screamed a clever articulate scream all the way down, and Harry held on, and the tide came in and in. And the crown went cold and dead in his hand, and the 50-year star at the top of the mountain of the forgotten went out. The price took the wonder. He had known it would take something, and he had not known it would be that, and when he reached for it out of the old reflex, standing there in the dust with the dead tiara in his hand, he found the socket where it had been and understood the exact shape of what was gone. Not a memory, not a warmth, the wonder. The felt fact of magic itself, the thing that had lived in him since a half-giant knocked down a door and said, "You're a wizard, Harry," the quiet astonishment that had ridden under every spell he had ever cast and every impossible thing he had ever seen. He could remember that he had once found magic wondrous. He could remember, in words, the boats and the ceiling and the first time a feather had risen off a desk. But the wonder itself was gone, carried down to the shore with the cleverest fragment as its clever coin. And magic was only mechanics now, only a set of rules he happened to be able to work, and the castle around him was only stone, and it would be only stone forever, because you cannot rebuild an astonishment out of the memory of having been astonished. He stood with that a moment in the dust, and did not reach for it again, because reaching only found the socket, and he had learned not to keep pressing the empty place. Then he went back down the mountain to the door where his two friends waited, and Hermione looked at his face and knew that something had been taken and did not know what. And she came the last step off the threshold, breaking the letter of her promise and keeping the whole of it, and put her hand flat against his chest, not an embrace, only a hand, only the fact of another living person choosing to stand close, and she said low, "You're colder. Every time I see you, you're colder. I'm keeping count now, Harry. I decided in the room, I'm going to keep count of every degree, and one day I'm going to make you tell me what the number's for." "I know," Harry said. "Keep counting. I need someone to be counting." And it was the truest thing he had said to her all term, and she heard that it was, and it had to be enough because it was all he could give. Dumbledore was waiting for him when he came down from the room of requirement, in the round office where the instruments turned, and he took the dead tiara from Harry's hands and turned it in his ruined fingers and set it down among the whirring silver with a care that was almost reverence, one relic laid to rest among the machinery of 100 old wars. "For," the old man said, "the diary, its vessel broken years ago in the chamber, though you tell me its last smoke will not settle until the very end. The ring, the locket, and the crown tonight, 4 doors shut. That leaves the cup in the vault and the serpent at his side," and he stopped and looked at Harry across the smoking basin, and his eyes went to the scar and away, and Harry understood that the old man had walked in a year of reading around the edges of a nameless thing all the way to the door at the end of the corridor, and had seen what stood behind it, and had said nothing because there was nothing that could be said. "And the last one," Dumbledore finished, "which we will not speak of tonight." "He told me the same thing," Harry said. "On the shore, we will not speak yet of how that one comes home. He said I wasn't ready to hear it, and that he doesn't waste a warning before its hour." He met the old man's eyes and did not let his own move away from them. "You know what it is, don't you? You've worked it out. There's a piece of him behind my scar, and it has to come home like all the others, and you've worked out what that means for the one who's carrying it, and you're not telling me for the same reason I'm not telling you things. Because you think if I know too soon I'll flinch." "I think," Dumbledore said, and his voice was very steady and very old, "that there is a difference between a warning given at its hour and a dread carried for a year, and that I would spare you the year of dread if I possibly can, because I have carried a year of dread on your behalf, and I would not wish it on anyone, least of all you. Let the thing on the shore keep its own counsel about its own hour. It has never once lied to you. It will not begin with the hardest truth of all. When the time comes for you to know how the last piece comes home, you will know, and I will be standing at your back when you learn it, and that is all I can give, and it is not enough, and it is what I have." He set his unburned hand for a moment on Harry's shoulder light and lifted it. "For now we have a cup to lift out of the earth, and we must do it soon, because the moment you take it he will feel it, and the moment he feels it he will understand what has been done to him, and from that moment he will not be a distant terror hidden in a manor. He will be a hunter, and you will be the thing he hunts, and the little quiet time we have had, this strange gray summer and autumn of walking into caves and coming out changed, will be over. So let us spend the last of the quiet well. Sleep tonight, tomorrow we go down into the goblin's dark, and after that there will be no more quiet at all." Harry slept or lay in the dark of the dormitory, listening to Ron breathe and the murmur of the dead at the edge of hearing, and in the morning they went to the bank. The cup was harder because the cup was underground, and the ground it was under belonged to the goblins. Dumbledore arranged it in the end through channels Harry did not see and did not ask about, and on a gray Saturday when the school believed Harry Potter was in the hospital wing with a chill, the two of them walked into the white marble hall of Gringotts Bank through a side door that most wizards never knew was there. The hall was vast and cold and full of the small ceaseless industry of the goblins, the scratch of quills, the clink of scales, the weighing and the counting that had gone on in that place since before the wizards had a ministry. and Harry, walking its length beside the old man, felt the goblins feel him. It went down the hall ahead of them like a change in the weather. Quills paused, dark heads came up. The goblins looked at Harry Potter, and they did not see a schoolboy with a famous scar. They saw the thing the mark had made of him, because the goblins, of all the peoples of the world, were the ones who had never once forgotten what death was owed. They were keepers of vaults of inheritances of the things the dead leave behind. Their whole ancient trade was the ledger of what passes from hand to hand when a hand goes cold, and they knew a debt collector of the oldest debt when one walked into their hall, knew it in their marrow, and a silence spread out around Harry as he walked, the particular silence of a counting house when the auditor arrives. An old goblin met them at the head of the hall. He was small and seamed and dressed richly, and his eyes, when they found Harry's, held a recognition that no wizards had ever held, level and unafraid and very old. "We do not ask," the old goblin said in a voice like stones settling, "why the marked hand comes to Gringotts, because there is only one reason a marked hand ever comes anywhere, and it is to collect. But there is a thing in a vault beneath this bank that does not belong in the world, and has offended the order of the ledger since the day it was placed there, and we have felt it, we have always felt it, a debt refused, sitting in the dark of the Lestrange vault like a coin that will not spend. If you have come for that hand, then the goblins of Gringotts will not stand between the collector and the collection. That is not our quarrel. Our quarrel is with cheats, and the thing in that vault is the greatest cheat that ever drew breath. Come, we will take you down." They went down in a cart that fell through the dark of the earth on rails that screamed, down past caverns and waterfalls and the deep cold that lives under the world. And the goblin rode with them and said nothing, and Harry watched the cold star grow in the sight, sunk deep in the roots of the bank behind door after door of goblin magic and dragonfire, and the old high-piled hoard of a family that had loved its gold as it loved its blood purity, jealously, murderously, to the exclusion of every warm thing. Deeper down, the cart passed a thing chained in the dark, and Harry felt it before the wanlight found it. A dragon, ancient and blind and pale, its scales gone the color of a thing kept too long from the sun, crouched over a cataract of black water with the marks of a lifetime's cruelty worked into its hide, trained by pain to fear the sound of a struck iron rattle, and to cower from a treasure it was set to guard. The goblins used it, and it was half mad with the using, and it turned its blind head toward the cart as they passed, and Harry looked at it with the sight and saw, under the madness, a thing that wanted only to die and could not, another prisoner of the deep places, another creature nailed to a life it had laid down the wanting of long ago. He could not free it. That was not the debt he had come to pay, and a hand that tried to pay every debt at once paid none of them. And so he looked at the blind dragon in its chains and made it silently a promise he did not know yet whether he could keep, that when the account was closed and the war was done he would come back down into the goblin's dark and open this cell too. Then the cart carried them past, and the dragon and its cataract fell behind, and the cold star of the cup burned nearer in the roots of the world. The Lestrange vault, when the goblin laid his long fingers on the door and it melted away, was a cave of treasure, and the treasure was cursed. Harry could see it at once, the shimmer over all of it, the gemino and the flagrante laid on every coin and cup and jewel, so that anything touched would burn and multiply, until the thief was buried and cooked alive under an avalanche of his own greed. It was a trap built out of wanting. It assumed the person reaching into the vault wanted the gold, wanted to take and to keep, and it punished the taking with more of the thing taken until the wanting killed you. And Harry stood at the door of it and understood that this was the one trap in the whole hunt that the shore could not turn, because it was not built out of the threat of death, it was built out of greed, and the shore had made him deaf to death, not to greed, and if he reached into that hoard wanting the cup, it would bury him. So he did not want the cup, that was the crack. He stood at the vault door and emptied himself of wanting, which was easier for him than it would have been for any other living hand, because the mark had already taken so many of the warm wanting things out of him that there was very little left in him to catch fire. He did not want the gold. He did not want the cup for itself. It was only a jar, only a vessel, only the thing a fragment had been poured into, and he had no more desire to own it than a man has to own the bottle a poison came in. He wanted only the debt paid. And a hand that reaches into a hoard of cursed gold without wanting any of it is a hand the curse has nothing to grip, because the curse feeds on the wanting, and there was no wanting in him to feed it. High on a shelf, wedged between a mountain of galleons that strained toward him hungrily and found no hunger to answer, sat a small golden cup with a badger chased on its side and two fine handles and the cold star burning inside it, and Harry walked into the burning hoard, and the gold leapt to multiply against his skin and could not catch, because there was nothing in him that wanted it, and he reached up, empty of everything but the debt, and took the cup and called it home. The shore opened through his hand, deep under the earth, in the roots of the goblin's bank. And the cup fought like a cornered animal, the way this one always would, because it was the peace he had made in the fullness of his cruelty, and it had none of the crown's cleverness, only appetite, only the raw refusal, and it thrashed and screamed and offered nothing because it had never in its existence learned to offer, only to take. And Harry held the badger cup in his marked hand in the burning vault and let the tide come up through him and draw the cold sun out of the gold and down, down home. And it was unmade, given at last the death it had cheated, gathered, closed over, and the star went out, and far away in a house Harry could not see, a man sitting at the head of a long table felt a piece of himself die and did not, for one more day, understand what he had felt. The price this time took the taste of butterbeer. It seemed almost a small thing, after the wonder, after the warmth, after the laugh, and Harry understood as the coin went down that the smallness was itself the cruelty, that the mark had reached in and found, among the last warm, ordinary things he had left, the taste of a butterbeer and the 3 broomsticks on a cold afternoon with his 2 friends, the froth of it and the warmth of it and the being 16 and safe for an hour of it, and had taken that because that was a thing he would miss. He would drink butterbeer again. It would be sweet, and it would be nothing, a temperature and a sugar. The taste of it fled to the shore with a badger cup. And the afternoons in the 3 broomsticks with Ron and Hermione would go on, and he would sit through them like a man watching a warm room through a window in the cold, present, and not warmed, and counting, as Hermione was counting, the degrees. He understood, standing in the settling cursed gold with the dead cup in his hand, that this was the true shape of the price and that he had only half grasped it before. It did not hurt, that was the cruelty of it. It took from a life that had never had much warmth to spare the very warmth he had scraped together over 16 hard years, and it took them cleanly without pain so that there was nothing to grieve in the moment of the taking, only a later reaching for and a finding gone. A person raised in a cupboard learns to hoard his few warm things the way a poor man hoards coin, and Harry had hoarded his. The laugh and the hug and the wonder and the froth of a butterbeer had kept them polished and safe against the cold, and now he was spending them one by one to buy a world for people who would never know the currency he had paid in. It was the most private wealth there was and the most private poverty, and there was no one he could tell. The old goblin looked at him as he came out of the burning vault with the dead cup in his hand and the gold settling back into its cursed heaps behind him, unburned, untouched, and there was on the seamed old face a thing that Harry had not seen on any face since the mark was set, which was not fear and was not awe but was recognition of a kindred keeping of accounts, one auditor regarding another across the counting-house of the world. "It is paid then," the goblin said. It was not a question. "It's paid," Harry said. "Now there's only a serpent that never leaves his side and the piece behind my own eyes and the man himself, and then the whole account closes." "Then the goblins of Gringotts owe the marked hand a debt," the old goblin said, "for lifting a cheat's coin out of our ledger, and we do not forget debts in either direction, and you will find, hand before the end, that there are places the wizards will bar to you and doors the ministry will shut, and that under all of them there is goblin stone, and the goblin stone will remember what you did in this vault. Go up now, go up into the air. You have brought the cold of the deep places into your face, and the living do not like to look at it, and you have a while yet before you belong wholly to the deep. Spend it up in the light while you can." They rode up out of the earth on the screaming rails, up past the waterfalls and the caverns and the sleeping dragon, up into the white marble hall where the goblins had gone back to their weighing and their counting, and out through the side door into the grey Saturday, and Harry stood on the cold step of Gringotts with the dead cup and the dead tiara both in his bag and let the sight come up and counted what was left. 1 coal. Only one now out in the world where 5 had burned in the summer, and it was not an object at all. It moved. Far off, coiled and warm and alive, close to the man himself, the serpent turned in the dark, the last guard before the last door, and it was the only one of the hidden pieces that could look back at Harry when he looked at it, because it was the only one that was, in its bound and twisted way, still alive. And behind his own eyes, apart from all the rest, sat the last of them, patient, sleeping, close as a second heartbeat, the piece of the enemy he carried in his own skull and had not yet let himself think all the way to the end of. "He felt that one," Harry said quietly, looking at the 2 remaining stars. "The cup, I felt him feel it. He doesn't understand it yet, but he felt a piece of himself go out, and he's clever, cleverer than the crown even, and he's going to start counting. He's going to go and check on his treasures one by one, and he's going to find the ring gone and the locket gone and the crown gone and the cup gone. And he's going to understand all at once that someone isn't killing him, someone is unmaking him, taking away the very thing that was supposed to make him unkillable. And when he understands that," Harry stopped, because the muscles for the almost smile were far away, and this was not a thing to smile at anyway. "When he understands that, he's going to be afraid, really afraid for the first time since the cottage. And a cornered, clever thing that's finally understood it can die is the most dangerous thing in the world, and we're about to make him into one on purpose." Dumbledore stood beside him on the cold step, the old man dying by his slow measure and the child dying by no measure at all, and looked out at the grey city where somewhere a serpent coiled and a man was about to start counting his stolen soul and finding it short. "Then we had better be ready," Dumbledore said, "for the most dangerous thing in the world. Come, Harry. We go back to the school and we prepare and we do not tell him where we are and we let him do the one thing that has never once helped him in the whole of his refusal, which is to be afraid. Take my arm. The light is going and you should be under a roof before the dark comes and the living start to notice the deep in your face. There is still a while yet. Let us not waste it standing on a step." Harry took the old man's arm and the grey city folded, and Gringotts and its ledger and its stolen coin now collected fell away behind them. In a manor house at the end of a long drive, in a high cold room he had made his own, Lord Voldemort set down his wine and went still. Something had gone out of the world. He could not have said at first what it was, only that a room in himself that had been furnished and lit for 50 years had, between one breath and the next, gone dark, and that the going dark had a taste to it, cold and final, the taste of a candle pinched between wet fingers. He sat with the sensation, motionless, because he did not move until he understood. That was a discipline he had built out of a lifetime of being the most dangerous thing in any room, and he waited for the understanding to come. It did not come, that was the first wrongness. Understanding had always come to him. He was the cleverest creature alive. He had made himself so, had filed and honed his mind for 60 years until there was nothing it could not open. And now he reached toward the dark room in himself and found that he could not name what had been in it, only that something had and that it was gone. He reached further. He did what he had never once in 15 years needed to do because there had never once been cause, and he counted. He had scattered himself with such care. 6 pieces he had hidden away, and a 7th part he had kept in his own breast, so that his soul lay in 7, the sacred number, and no single blow, no accident, no clever old man could ever gather it all. And he had never counted them because there had never been need, because they were his, tucked into the fabric of the world where they would sit safe until the stars burned out. A diary given to Lucius, a servant's insurance and a servant's leash. A ring in the fallen house of his mother's people, under the floor, under the curse. A locket deep in the black lake under the cliff where he had first learned what he was. A cup given to the doting fool Hepzibah's memory, hidden in the deepest vault of his most devoted. A crown in the school, in the room that forgets. And the serpent, and the last piece, the one that had gone wrong, lodged 15 years ago in the skull of a screaming infant. He reached for each of them in turn, for the warm reassurance of their presence that he had never before had to consciously feel, and he found silence. The diary, silence. He had known of the diary. Malfoy the fool had let it be destroyed years ago, and Voldemort had raged at the loss and consoled himself that 5 remained, that 5 was strong, that the loss of 1 could be borne. But now reaching, he found not the wound he remembered but a deeper absence, and even the memory of the diary seemed swept clean out of the fabric where it had hung. The ring, silence. The locket, silence. The cup was the dark room, the candle just pinched, the going out he had felt while his wine sat breathing on the table. The crown, silence, and old silence, a silence that had been there for weeks and that he had not felt because he had not thought to feel for it, had trusted the room that forgets to keep his treasure as it had kept it for 50 years. Gone. 5 of the 6 he had hidden, all but the serpent still coiled and living at his side, reaching into himself and finding room after room after room gone dark and cold and swept absolutely empty, not broken, not looted, not even mourned, unmade, never placed at all, the very holes he had torn in himself to make them healed over clean, leaving him whole, leaving him mortal. Lord Voldemort sat in his high, cold room and felt a thing move through him that he had spent his entire existence abolishing. He had built his whole self on its abolition. That was the meaning of the Horcruxes, under the immortality, under the power. They were the 7 walls he had raised against the one thing he could not bear, the flinch, the cold animal drop of the stomach, the small childish terror of ending that he had felt in an orphanage cot and sworn, before he had the words to swear it, that he would never feel again. He had torn his soul apart precisely so that he would never again have to feel this. And now it was in the room with him, familiar and patient, as though it had only been waiting behind the walls for the walls to come down, and the walls were coming down, one by one. Someone was taking them down, and Lord Voldemort, the most dangerous thing in the world, sat alone in a high, cold room and was afraid. The fear lasted the length of 3 of his slow breaths. Then he did the thing that made him what he was, which was to take the fear and fold it and set it down and sharpen it into a question, because a mind like his did not drown in a feeling, it used it. Someone was unmaking him, not killing his body was nothing, his body he could shed like a coat, unmaking the pieces. Reaching into the deepest, best hidden, most cursed places in the world and lifting out the scraps of his soul and doing something to them worse than destruction, something that left no wound, and doing it in an order, working inward, saving for last the 2 that were nearest to him. The serpent and Potter. He had felt it in the atrium the summer before. He had poured himself into the child through the old Scarlodge splinter, meaning to take, and he had touched something in there that had made him tear himself back out with a scream he had not made since he was mortal, a cold, a vastness, a patient waiting thing wearing Lily Potter's son like a glove. He had told himself afterward that it had been a child's mawkish love, the mother's old dead protection, the sentimental magic he despised. He had made himself believe it because the other possibility was not to be entertained. Now, reaching into his own swept-empty rooms, he entertained it. Something was inside Potter, something old, something that collected debts. And it had marked the one hand in the world that stood on both sides of the threshold, and it had sent that hand walking through every trap Lord Voldemort had ever built, and the traps had not held because they had all been built to catch the living, and the thing wearing that scarred child was not quite that. He rose from his chair. The wine sat forgotten. Below him, in the dark of the manor, his servants felt their master move and went still in their own rooms, still as small creatures under a passing shadow. And Lord Voldemort stood at the high cold window and looked out at the night and made in the space of a minute the coldest calculation of his life, which was this, that he could not run from a thing that lived on the far side of death, because death was the one country he had spent everything to make sure he could always flee into, and it was precisely that country that had turned against him. There was nowhere to run. The exit he had built was the mouth that was eating him. And so there was only one move left on the board, the move of a cornered thing that has understood at last that it is cornered, which was to stop being hunted and start hunting, to find Potter and the thing inside him, and to end it on his own terms in his own hour, before the hand reached the serpent, before it reached the last splinter, before the final door swung shut. He would not sit in a high room and be unmade a wall at a time. He would go and meet the collector, and he would find in Potter's own mind, through the splinter that still joined them, exactly where the hand meant to strike next, and he would be there first. Now, Genie, he said softly to the dark, and far below the great serpent lifted its head. Come, we are watched, and we have been careless, and there is a boy who has forgotten that a cornered thing bites hardest of all. Let us remind him. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. Now Genie and the cornered god, the hunting went both ways now, and Harry felt the turn of it the first night after Gringotts, when he closed his eyes and found the enemy already inside them. It was not the old possession, the crude flood of the atrium. Voldemort had learned. He came now the way a thief comes, through the splinter behind the scar, quiet, patient, testing the edges of Harry's sleeping mind for the one thing he needed, which was the shape of the next attack. He did not know he was hunting the last of his own soul. He knew only that a hand was working inward through his hidden pieces, and that the two nearest his heart were the serpent and the Potter child, and so he came looking night after night along the old cord that joined them to learn whether the hand meant to strike his snake or his own white throat, and where and when. He found the shore each time, and each time it cost him. That was the strange, grim comfort of those nights. When Voldemort reached deep enough, when he pushed past the surface of Harry's dreams and into the place where the mark lived, he touched the tide, the cold that had never once been warm, and he recoiled because he was a creature made entirely of the refusal of that cold and could not bear even the edge of it. But he had grown cunning, and he did not push deep every time. He learned to skim. He learned to read the shallows of Harry's mind without waking the thing in the deep of it, to lift an image here, a fear there, a fragment of the day's plans, and stitch them into a map of what the hand would do. And Harry, waking gray and wrung out morning after morning, understood that the two of them were now locked in a contest that had nothing to do with wands, a contest of who could read the other's mind without being read in return, and that Voldemort had been the finest legilimens alive for 50 years, and that Harry had been learning the art for 18 months from a hostile teacher, and a set of instincts a dead thing had lent him. There was one night that stood out from the rest, the third one, when the enemy came further in than he had before. Harry found himself walking a corridor that was and was not Hogwarts, the stone gone wrong at the edges, the torches burning a color torches do not burn, and he understood in the way of dreams that he was not alone in it. Voldemort walked beside him. Not the white body, the mind of him, a cold pressure at Harry's shoulder, patient, conversational, turning over the contents of the corridor as they passed. The doors that were memories, opening them one by one, unhurried, a man browsing a library he intends to burn. He opened a door, and there was the cupboard under the stairs, and he looked at it with something that was almost recognition, almost kinship, and said without a voice, "They kept you in a box too," and Harry felt the enemy try to make a bridge out of that, out of the two orphaned, unwanted boys they had both been, and Harry shut the door. Voldemort opened another, and there was the graveyard and Cedric, and the enemy lingered there with satisfaction, tasting it, and said, "I gave you that. You have never stopped bleeding from that. Let me show you how to stop," and Harry shut that door too. And then the cold pressure at his shoulder drifted toward a door at the end of the corridor that Harry had not known was there. A plain door, a small light under it, and Harry understood with the whole of his sleeping self that behind it was the shore, that Voldemort was walking toward the one room in Harry's mind that would unmake him to touch, and Harry did not shut that door. He opened it. He opened it wide and let the cold that had never once been warm come pouring out into the wrong-colored corridor, and the pressure at his shoulder recoiled with a hiss that was almost a scream, and the corridor came apart, and Harry woke with the scar burning and the taste of the enemy's dread in his own mouth, and lay in the dark and understood that he had found, at last, the one move in the game the enemy could not answer, which was to stop defending the shore and start offering it. Dumbledore taught him what he could in the round office at night, the old discipline of occlumency that Snape had failed to beat into him the year before, and it came easier now, because the mark had already emptied so many of the warm, cluttered rooms of Harry's mind that there was less for an intruder to catch hold of. A man with nothing in his pockets is hard to pick. But it was not enough, and both of them knew it was not enough. And on the fourth night, Harry sat up in the dark of the dormitory with the scar cold and open and Voldemort's attention moving through the back of his skull like a hand through a drawer. And he understood that he could not simply defend forever, that a wall only ever delays the thing on the far side of it, and that sooner or later he would have to stop being red and start being the one who chose the ground. "He wants me to come to him," Harry said to Dumbledore the next morning. He had not slept, and he let it show because there was no one left to perform for. That's what all the probing is. He can't find the next Horcrux because the next Horcrux is his own snake and then his own self, and there's nothing for his hand to reach that isn't already close to him. He's worked out that the only way the hunt ends is if I come to where he is, so he's decided to make himself the bait. He's going to set himself somewhere with the snake out in the open and dare me to come and finish it, because he thinks that on his own ground, with all his people around him, he can kill me before I can reach the snake, and that if he kills me, he kills the piece of himself in my head as a bonus and buys himself back 2 of his 7 walls in a single night. Harry looked at the old man across the desk. "And the worst part is he's right that I have to come. I can't unmake the snake from a distance. I have to have my hand on it, so there's no version of this where I don't walk onto his ground and into the middle of everything he's got. He knows it, I know it. The only thing left to decide is whether I walk in as the thing he's expecting or as something else." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment, the old ruined hand resting on the desk, the dying in him a little further along than it had been in the summer, a grayness under the skin that Harry's sight read like a clock. Then we do not give him what he is expecting, Dumbledore said. He's expecting a boy with a wand and an old man to protect him, walking into a trap out of duty and dying in it bravely, as boys and old men have been doing against him for 50 years. He has beaten that 100 times. He has never once in all his long refusal had to face the thing you actually are, because you are the first of your kind he has ever met. So let us not disguise it. Let us not sneak you onto his ground. Let us walk you onto it as what you are, the marked hand, the collector, the one thing in the world his traps were not built to catch. And let him spend his whole arsenal on you and discover in front of everyone who fears him that none of it touches you, because you are already standing on the far side of the only threat he has ever had to offer. Fear is his whole kingdom, Harry. Let us go and show his court that their king has met a thing he cannot fright. Hermione found him that evening in the empty classroom on the fourth floor where the DA had once practiced, because Hermione always found him, and she had the Marauder's map in her hand and Ron at her shoulder and an expression that said she had done the arithmetic and did not like the sum. "You've been meeting Dumbledore every night for a week," she said. "You disappeared for a whole day and came back with cold in your face I could see from across the hall." Ron heard the professors talking about a village in the west, "And now you've got the look you get right before you do something none of us can talk you out of." She stopped, and the map trembled a little in her hand, and she made it stop. "I'm not asking what the thing is, I promised, but I'm asking one question that isn't the thing, and you're going to answer it because I've earned one question. Are you coming back, whatever you're walking into? Is it the kind of thing you walk back out of?" Harry looked at the two of them, his two friends, who had followed him down every corridor since they were 11, and he weighed a lie and could not lift it. "I don't know," he said. "There's a part of this near the end that I don't know the price of yet. It might be everything. I'm not telling you that to frighten you. I'm telling you because you asked me a question that wasn't the thing, and you've earned the truth of it, and the truth is I don't know, and I'd rather you hear I don't know from me than hear something worse from someone else later." Ron, who had said nothing, who noticed less and loved no less for it, spoke then, and his voice was rough. "Then we're coming." "You're not," Harry said gently. "Not this one's mine. There's a reason it has to be mine, and it's the same reason I've been cold all autumn, and it's the same reason I can't tell you the thing, but listen." He looked at them, and he gave them the only thing he had that was worth giving. "Everything I'm doing, all of it, the whole cold, terrible business of it, I'm doing it for a room with people in it. That's what he never understood, and I'm only just learning. He tore himself into pieces to live forever in an empty room. And I'm spending myself to pieces so that a room somewhere stays full. This room, you too, the burrow with all its windows lit. I can't feel it the way I used to, the warmth of it. He's taken that one piece at a time. But I remember that it's worth it in words, even when I can't feel that it is, and the remembering is enough to keep walking on. So if I don't walk back out, I need you to know that the last clear thing in me under all the cold was that the two of you were the room I was buying." He held out his hand, and Ron gripped it, and Hermione put both of hers over the top, and for a moment the three of them stood in the empty classroom the way they had stood at the start of everything, before any of it had cost what it had cost. "I'm still counting," Hermione said unevenly. "Every degree, and when you come back, you're coming back, I'm going to make you tell me the number, and then I'm going to spend the rest of my life helping you get some of it back. That's the deal. That's what you're walking back out for. Don't you dare make me a liar." It happened 11 days later, and it happened because Voldemort grew tired of waiting and decided to bait the trap with the one currency he had finally understood that Harry could not ignore, which was the living. He took a village. A small, ordinary wizarding village in the West, the kind of place where nothing had ever happened, and he did not burn it, because burning it would have said nothing, and he had learned at last that Harry could not be moved by the dead. He held it. He put his people in the lanes and his snake at his side in the old inn at the center of it, and 100 ordinary living people under his wands in their own homes. And he sent through the scar in the small hours a single image to a sleeping boy in a tower. A street of frightened faces, a promise without words: "Come and collect, collector, or I begin to make the living into the dead, one house at a time, until you do." And Harry woke with the taste of the enemy in his mouth and knew the hour had come. The hour death did not waste a warning before, and he rose in the dark and dressed and did not wake the others, because there were some doors a person had to walk toward alone. Dumbledore met him at the gates. Of course, Dumbledore met him at the gates. The old man had not truly slept since the summer, keeping his last strength banked against exactly this. And they went west together, the dying man and the marked one, into the last dark before the last dawn, toward a village full of hostages and a cornered god who had at last understood that he could die, and had decided in the manner of all cornered things that if he was going to die he would take the whole world down into the dark with him first. The village was silent when they came into it, silent in the particular way of a place where a great many people are holding very still behind their doors. Voldemort's people stood in the lanes, cloaked and masked, and they did not move as Harry walked past them, because their master had given an order, and the order was to let Potter come to the inn, to let him walk the whole length of the trap and see it close around him, so that his death would teach the watching village the futility of hope. Harry walked the lane with Dumbledore a pace behind, and he did not raise his wand, and the masked figures turned their heads to follow him, and something began to go wrong in the ranks of them before he had reached the inn, a shifting and unease, because the young man walking toward their master's snake was not afraid, and they were all of them connoisseurs of fear. They had built their lives around the giving and receiving of it. and they knew the absence of it when they saw it walk past them in a torn coat with the deep places showing in its face. Voldemort waited in the taproom of the old inn, and Nagini was with him. She lay cold on the flagstones at the foot of his chair, vast and patient, her great flat head raised, and the cold star burned inside her, turning the last object tanker of the seven, hidden not in gold or silver or stone, but in the living muscle of a serpent he had made his own. Voldemort sat in the innkeeper's chair as though it were a throne, white and still, his wand loose across his knees, and his red eyes found Harry in the doorway with an attention that had in it, under the mask of contempt, the thing Harry had felt him fold and sharpen in the manner 11 days before. He had come here to kill the Collector. He had also come here because there was nowhere else left to go, and both of those things lived behind the red eyes at once. "You came," Voldemort said. His voice was soft and dry and carried in the still room. "I confess I was not certain you would. I have studied you all autumn through the small window your mother left open in your head, and I could not decide what you had become. You do not fight like a boy anymore. You do not fight at all. You walk into rooms and things go out of the world, and I could not for the longest time understand what was doing it, until I understood that it was not a spell and not a weapon but a thing wearing you, a thing that has no business on this side of the veil, and that it has been walking you through my life's work and unmaking it a piece at a time." The long white fingers moved on the wand. "I have decided that I do not care what it is. It can be unmade in its turn like anything. If the vessel it wears is broken, you are still, under whatever rides you, a boy who bleeds, and I have arranged this evening so that a great many people will watch you discover it." "You've arranged this evening," Harry said, "because you finally understand that you can die and you can't stand to be alone with that, so you filled a village with hostages and put 100 masks in the lanes so you don't have to feel how alone you actually are." He stepped into the taproom, and behind him Dumbledore came as far as the threshold and stopped, because this was Harry's ground now, the ground of the marked hand, and the old man had promised a long time ago to stand at the door. "I'm not going to fight you tonight, Tom, not the way you want. I didn't come for you. You're not even the reason I'm here. I came for her." He looked down at the great coiled serpent, at the cold star burning in her living muscle. "You put a piece of yourself in something that was alive. That's the cruelest one, in a way, crueler than the drowned in the lake, because you took a living thing that had its own life to live and you scooped part of it out and poured yourself in, and she's been carrying you for years, a jar with a heartbeat. I'm going to take you out of her. And I want you to watch, because you're never going to see anyone else do it, because after her there's only two of you left in the world, and one of them is in my head, and the other one is sitting in a borrowed chair pretending a taproom is a throne." Voldemort moved, and the room came apart. He was fast, faster than anything Harry had ever dueled, 50 years of murder distilled into a single white blur, and the killing curse crossed the taproom before the last word of it had finished sounding, a bolt of green that would have ended any living thing it touched. It touched Harry. It struck him full in the chest, in front of the whole silent watching in front of the masks crowding the windows, and there was a flash of green and a sound and the smell of it, and Harry stood in the middle of the room and did not fall. The curse broke against him the way the ring's curse had broken, the way everything built on the thread of death broke against him now, because a killing curse is only the promise of death delivered very fast, and the promise of death has no power over a hand that death has already claimed. Harry felt it strike and felt it search him for the place where his life was kept, the soft mortal place all the living carry, and find instead the shore, the tide coming in and in, the cold that had never once been warm, and shatter against it, spent undone, a green light going out against a wall of patient dark. He rocked back a half step. He did not fall. And across the taproom Lord Voldemort's white face did the thing it had done in the atrium, the thing it had sworn it would never do again, and this time there was an audience of 100 masked believers to see their king watch his deadliest curse strike a boy full in the chest and do nothing at all. "That was the last time," Harry said quietly into the ringing silence, "that you get to point that at me and expect it to mean anything. You spent 50 years making that curse the most frightening thing in the world, and you just spent it on the one person alive it can't touch, in front of everyone you've ever ruled by fear. Look at them, Tom, look at their faces." And the masks in the windows had drawn back, and the cloaked figures in the doorway behind Dumbledore had gone very still, because the whole architecture of their obedience had just been the fear of that green light, and they had watched it fail. "Your kingdom was always just this one spell and the terror of it, and it's over. Watch the rest of it go." Voldemort did not run yet, because a creature does not abandon a kingdom the moment it cracks. It first spends everything trying to prove the crack is a trick of the light. He raised the wand the killing curse had failed him with, and he threw the rest of his 50 years at the young man in the middle of the taproom, and Harry stood in the storm of it and let it break. Fire came, cursed fire the color of a wound, and it curled around Harry and found nothing in him that feared to burn, because burning was only a fast unmaking, and unmaking was where he lived, and it guttered against the deep places and went out. A lash of magic meant to flay the flesh from bone crossed the room and found the flesh it struck already half promised to the shore and slid off it like water off stone. He conjured shapes out of the dark, terrors pulled from the deepest cellar of his art, things with too many joints in the faces of the drowned, and they surged toward Harry across the flagstones and stopped, all of them at the edge of him, because they were made of fear and there was no fear in him to feed them. And one by one they turned their too many jointed heads and looked, not at Harry, but at the white man who had made them and Voldemort for one moment. stood alone in a room full of his own conjured horrors while they regarded their maker with the patience of things waiting to be dismissed. Every weapon he had ever ruled the world with, and Harry walked through the whole arsenal of it unhurried and did not once raise his wand, and the not raising was louder than any spell because it said to the white man and to the 100 masks in the windows that the collector did not consider the king dangerous enough to answer. He crossed the room to the serpent. Voldemort came off the chair like something uncoiling, all the cold economy of him bent to a single purpose, and he did not reach for his wand again because the wand had failed him. He reached with his hands with his whole self, throwing himself between the collector and the last of his hidden soul, and for one moment the two of them were close enough that Harry could see the fine tracery of veins under the white skin and the red eyes wide with the thing he had abolished and could not now unfeel. But Nagini had raised her head and the cold star turned toward Harry, and the fragment in her knew the hand as all the fragments knew it, and it did the thing they all did, which was reach and want, and in the reaching it forgot for an instant to be a weapon, and that instant was all Harry needed. He put his marked hand flat on the great flat head of the serpent, gentle, almost tender, the touch of a healer and not a killer, and he called the sixth fragment home. The shore opened through his hand in the taproom of an ordinary inn in front of 100 masks and a cornered god. It was different this time because the vessel was alive. The tide came up through Harry and reached into the living muscle of the serpent for the cold sun buried in it, and the fragment thrashed, and Nagini thrashed with it, because she was a living thing and part of her had grown around the splinter of Voldemort until she could not tell where the poison ended and she began. Harry held his hand steady on her head and did for her what death had taught him to do for the drowned, which was to see the truth of her. Not a monster, not a weapon, a living creature that had been hollowed out and made into a jar, that had never asked to carry a piece of a dead man's refusal, that had its own snake's life. It should have lived in some warm country and had had it stolen and filled with cold. He called the fragment home, and he called her with it, not as an enemy but as another of the stolen, and the tide came in and drew the piece of Tom Riddle up out of the serpent and through the marked hand and down to the shore, and it was unmade, given the death it had cheated, gathered, closed over. And Nagini, freed of the thing that had ridden her for years, went down into the same tide, released, her long theft ended, and for the length of a breath Harry felt the simple animal gratitude of a creature let out of a cage it had never understood it was in. And then she too was gone home, and the great coils loosened on the flagstones and were only a dead snake, and the cold star was out. Six doors shut. And in the taproom of the inn Lord Voldemort staggered because he had felt the sixth wall fall, felt it inside himself the way you feel a room go dark. And there were only two of him left now in all the turning world. The piece behind a boy's scar and the raw remaining trunk of him standing white and swaying over the body of his dead serpent. And for the first time since a curse rebounded in a cottage 15 years before, Lord Voldemort was very nearly only a man. He looked at Harry across the dead snake, and the red eyes had lost the last of their contempt. And what was left in them was older and simpler and more human than anything Harry had ever seen in that white face. And it was the thing the potion had shown Harry in the cave, the true bottom of the man, the small child in the orphanage cot who had felt the cold drop of ending and sworn he would never feel it again, and had spent 60 years and 8 torn pieces of his soul building the walls that were now, one after another, coming down. "What are you?" Voldemort said, and it was not the taunt it had been in the doorway. It was a question. It was almost, God help them both, a plea. "I'm the thing you made," Harry said. "The night you decided you'd rather tear your soul into 8 pieces than pay what everyone pays, you left one of the pieces in me. You made me half yours and half death's, and you made me the one hand in the world that could do this, and then you spent 15 years trying to kill me and could never understand why it never took. It never took because I was never only alive. You did this, Tom, not me. You dug the hole you're standing over. All I ever did was stop being afraid of it." He looked down at the dead serpent and then back up at the swaying man, and his voice was not cruel, because cruelty was a warmth he could no longer afford and would not have spent on this even if he could. "There's 2 of you left, the piece in me and you, and I already know how the second to last one has to go because I'm looking at you, and you already know it too because you can feel yourself thinning. But there's a thing about the last one that I don't know yet, the one in my head. And I have a feeling that when I find out, I'm going to understand why you're not the hardest part of this. Go on, run, you've got until I work out how to take the piece of you out of my own skull without going down to the shore with it. That's the only door I don't know how to open yet. Use the time, it's the last time you're ever going to have." And Voldemort ran. He did the thing he had built his whole existence to be able to do, and fled, snatched into the black whirl of disapparition an instant before the masks in the windows could see whether their king would kneel, and his people fled with him, the cloaks scattering out of the lanes like leaves before weather, because the fear that had held them had watched a green light fail against a boy's chest and had nothing left to stand on. The village came out of its houses into the gray of the dawn, blinking, alive, every one of them alive, and they found in the taproom of the old inn a dead snake, and a dying old man leaning in a doorway, and a boy with the deep places showing in his face, standing very still over the 6th closed door, and not one of them understood what they were looking at, and all of them for the rest of their lives would remember that they had been in the room where the terror ended. It was Dumbledore who told Harry the last thing in the end, because Death had said the warning would come at its hour, and the hour had come. And Death, that night, spoke through the one mouth Harry would believe it from. They sat in the emptied taproom as the village stirred back to life around them, and the old man's face was grayer than the dawn, and he looked at Harry across the dead serpent for a long while before he found the words. And when he found them, his voice was very gentle and very steady, the voice a person uses for the one truth they have been dreading to say. You asked me weeks ago whether I had worked out what it means for the one who carries the last piece, Dumbledore said. I had. I have known since the summer, since before the ring, and I have carried it alone because you asked the thing on the shore to keep its counsel until the hour, and I would not steal that hour from it. But the hour is here, Harry, the snake is gone. There is only the piece in your scar and the man himself, and you cannot take the man until you have taken the piece, because while it lives in you it is his last anchor, and it will pull him back into the world however many times you break his body. So it must come home first, and there is only one way a fragment lodged in a living soul comes home. The old man's eyes were bright and terrible. It comes home the way all of them come home, down to the shore, through the door, and the door this time is you. To unmake the piece of him in you, Harry, you must open the shore inside your own chest and let the tide take it. And to open the shore inside your own chest all the way, you must do the one thing that opens it all the way for everyone, the thing every living creature does exactly once. You must go to the shore yourself, you must die. The taproom was very quiet. Outside, a child laughed alive in the gray dawn. I know, Harry said. And the terrible thing, the thing that sat in the room with them heavier than the dead snake or the coming day, was that he did. He had known, he realized, since the shore itself, since the first night, when the voice of the oldest thing in the world had said, we will not speak yet of how that one comes home, you are not ready to hear it. He had carried the not knowing the way you carry a splinter you will not look at. And now Dumbledore had looked at it for him and named it, and it was exactly the shape he had refused to let himself feel it was. And he sat in the emptied taproom with the sixth door shut behind him and the seventh waiting in his own skull, and understood that the last unmaking was going to ask of him the one coin the others had only ever taken pieces of, and that he was going to have to decide. Before the next dawn or the one after, whether he was willing to walk down to the shore himself in hope, with no promise at all that the tide would let him walk back up. That night the shore came up to meet him, and Harry did not resist it, because there were things he needed to hear said fully, and only one voice in all the world would say them without softening. He stood on the endless murmuring dark with the cold tide over his feet, and the figure was there, tall past comfort, folded in its wing dark, and the vast patient attention settled over him, and for the first time it did not feel entirely like weather, it felt a little like being met. You know what I am going to ask of you, Death said, you have known since the first night. I told you then that we would not speak of how the last piece comes home until its hour, and its hour has come, and the old man has said the word I did not say, and I will not pretend he was wrong. To draw the splinter of him out of you, you must open the shore all the way, and the shore only opens all the way for one reason. You must come to me, not halfway, not the marked reaching that closes a door and pays a coin. All the way down, the whole crossing, the thing every living creature does exactly. That is the price of the seventh door. I told you on the first night that the price was worse than death and less than death both. This is the part that is simply death, plainly, with no clever name. Do I come back, Harry said. The great stillness held and did not rush to fill itself, because it had all the time there was, and it did not deal in the false mercy of a quick answer. I do not know, Death said, and the honesty of it was more terrible than any threat. Hear me carefully, because this is the truest thing I will ever tell you, and it is not a comfort and it is not a doom. It is only the truth, which is the one thing I have to give that no one else can. You carry a piece of him and a mark of mine, and when you come down to the shore, the piece of him will be drawn out of you and unmade, because it is a stolen thing, and stolen things are mine to gather. That will happen, that is certain. What is not certain is you. You will stand on this shore with the last of him gone out of you, whole for the first time since the cottage, no longer half his, only mine and your own, and there will be a choice, and it will be yours, and I will not make it for you, and I cannot promise you the outcome of it. You may go on, everyone may always go on. The shore is a door that opens both ways for exactly one soul in an age, and you are that soul. Or you may stay and rest as your godfather rests, and there is no shame in the staying, and I will think no less of you, for I think no less of anyone. But I will not lie to you and say the way back is easy or sure. I have chosen you, and I have marked you, and I have spent you, and at the very end I will not spend the one thing I have refused to spend on anyone since the world was made, which is the truth. You may not come back, you must go anyway. That is the whole of what it means to have been chosen. Everyone else gets to hope they will not have to choose. You do not. You have always known you did not. Harry stood on the shore with the cold tide coming in and did not answer for a while, and the shore let him not answer. I'll go, he said at last. There was no bravado in it. It was only true, the way a stone is true, the way the tide is true. You knew I'd say that. Everyone always knows before I do. But I'm going to do one thing first in the morning, before I come down here for good or for a while. I'm going to go and sit in a room with the two people I bought with all of this, and I'm going to look at them, and even if I can't feel it anymore, I'm going to spend one last morning in a full room, so that when I walk down here having been, one more time, a person among people and not just a hand that closes doors. You can have everything else. You've already got everything else. Give me the morning. The morning is yours, Death said, and there was in the vast cold voice a thing that was not warmth, because it did not deal in warmth, but that stood where warmth would stand, the nearest the oldest thing in the world had ever come in the whole age of it to tenderness. Take it, sit in the full room. And when you are ready and not one moment before, come down to the shore, and I will be waiting as I have waited for you since before you could speak, as I wait for everyone, patient and without judgment and without end. Go and have your morning, chosen one. You have earned an ending of your own choosing, which is the rarest thing I give, and I give it to you gladly, and I will see you at the water when the light has gone. Harry woke in the gray of the dormitory with the murmur at the edge of hearing and Ron breathing in the next bed and the whole impossible day ahead of him. The last day, whatever the last day proved to hold. And he lay still and watched the ceiling go from black to gray to the first thin gold of a morning he had bought at a price no one else would ever fully know. And he did not get up right away, because it was his this morning, the shore had said so. And he meant to have every minute of it before he went down to the water and did the last thing he had been chosen to do. Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. The unmaking Harry spent his morning the way the shore had said he could, in a full room, and it was the hardest and the best thing he had done in the whole cold hunt. They were all at Hogwarts by then because the war had drawn tight and the school had become the last safe-walled place in a country holding its breath, and the great hall in the early light was loud with the ordinary business of the living, plates and voices and the scrape of benches, and Harry sat at the Gryffindor table between Ron and Hermione and let it wash over him. He could not feel the warmth of it. That had been taken in installments, a laugh and a hug and a wonder and a taste, carried down to the shore one door at a time, and what was left to him was the fact of the room without the heat of it, a full room seen through glass. But he had learned that the fact was worth having even without the heat, that you could love a thing by decision when you could no longer love it by sensation. And so he sat in the loud, bright hall and looked at the faces, one after another, and gave each of them the whole of his attention, which was the last warm thing he still had to give. Ron argued about Quidditch with Ginny across the table and did not know he was being memorized. Hermione sat close against Harry's side, not talking, her shoulder against his, and she knew. She had known since he came down the stairs that morning with a stillness on him that had not been there the night before, the stillness of a person who has decided something and is only waiting for the hour. She did not ask. She had one question left and she was saving it, and she spent the morning instead simply pressing her shoulder to his. A steady weight, the fact of another living person choosing to stay close, and Harry leaned into it and could not feel its warmth and treasured it anyway because he could still feel the pressure, and the pressure said she was there and there was enough. "You're going today," she said finally, very low under the noise, not a question either. "The part you don't know the price of, it's today." "It's today," Harry said. "Then eat your breakfast," Hermione said, and her voice was steady and her eyes were not, "because you never eat before the big ones and you always regret it, and I am not going to let the last ordinary thing I do for you be watching you skip breakfast." And she put a piece of toast on his plate and Harry ate it, and it tasted of nothing because taste had gone down to the shore with a badger cup. But he ate all of it because she had asked, and it was, he understood, the last meal he would eat as a person who did not yet know whether he was coming back. And there are worse ways to spend such a meal than doing a small kindness because a friend asked you to. He let his eyes move over the rest of the hall while he ate the tasteless toast, because it was his morning and he meant to fill it. Luna Lovegood 2 tables over, eating porridge and reading a magazine upside down, unafraid of the war as she was unafraid of everything, wearing her strangeness-like armor no curse had ever found the seam of. Ginny further down the Gryffindor bench, laughing at something, alive and bright and furious with the ordinary fury of the young who have not yet been told they might lose. The staff at the high table, McGonagall stern over her tea, the smaller, frightened first-years clustered close to the older ones. The whole loud, fragile, improbable community of the living, gathered under an enchanted ceiling that this morning showed a clear and pitiless blue. He looked at all of it and he could not feel the warmth of it, and he loved it anyway by the plain decision to love it, which he had learned was a thing you could still do when the sensation had gone, the way a man who has lost the use of his legs can still decide every single day to be going somewhere. This was the room. This was the whole of the argument, the entire case against the man and the manor and everything he stood for. He had torn himself into 8 pieces to sit alone in an empty room forever. And this room was full and it was loud and it was going to stay full and loud because a hand had been chosen and had said yes and was going to go and pay the last of the price before the toast was cold. Harry finished the toast. He had promised Hermione, and it was in the end the last promise he was certain he could keep. Dumbledore found him after in the entrance hall, and the old man was very near his own ending now. Harry's sight read it plainly, the gray gone deep, the light in him banked low, a candle in its last quarter-inch. They stood together by the great doors with the morning coming in gold across the flagstones. "He is coming here," Dumbledore said. "Today, I have felt it gathering all night. He has understood that he cannot hide from a hand that reaches through death, and that he cannot beat it in a village taproom in front of witnesses. And so he is doing the last thing a cornered king can do, which is to throw his whole strength at the one wall between him and the thing he wants, and the wall is this school, and the thing he wants is you. He means to take the castle and find you in it and kill you, because your death is the only move he has left that gives him back an anchor, and he does not know, he cannot know that your death is precisely the move you have been waiting to let him make." The old man looked at Harry and his eyes were wet and clear. "You are going to let him kill you." "I'm going to let him open the door," Harry said. "It's the only way the piece of him in me comes home. He'll think he's winning." He'll point the curse at me and it'll land this time because I'll let it land because I need the crossing, and he'll think for one moment that he's finally done it, that he's killed the thing that couldn't be killed. And then Harry stopped because he did not know the end of the sentence, because no one had promised him the end of the sentence. And then we'll see, death wouldn't lie to me about it. It said the way back opens for one soul in an age and I'm the soul, but it wouldn't promise the walking. So I go down and the piece of him gets drawn out of me and I stand on the shore hole for the first time since the cottage and I choose. And if I choose to come back, I come back as the only thing in the world that can do the last unmaking, because I'll be all the way his deaths and none of it his anymore. And if I can't come back, he looked at the old man. Then you'll have to hope someone else was chosen too, somewhere, because I won't be able to finish it and I'm sorry. And it's the one part of this I can't control. Dumbledore reached out and took Harry's face in his two hands, the good one and the ruined one, and held it the way a grandfather holds the face of a child he is about to lose, and he did not tell Harry to be careful, and he did not tell Harry it would be all right, because he had spent his whole life learning at last not to lie to the people he loved. I have watched a great many brave people walk toward their deaths, the old man said. I have sent some of them. It is the great sin of my life, the sending. And I want you to know before you go that you are not being sent. Not by me, not by a prophecy, not by anyone. You are walking of your own will toward a thing you chose, for a reason you understand better than any of us, and that makes you the freest person I have ever known and the least like him, because everything he ever did he did in terror of exactly this walk, and you are taking it with your eyes open and your hands empty and a piece of toast in your stomach that a friend made you eat. Go and take your walk, Harry, and if the shore lets you come back, and if it does not, the old voice did not break quite. I will be along myself very soon by the ordinary slow road, and I will look for you at the water, and we will finish the conversation there. Harry had an hour before the storm broke, and he spent part of it alone on the stone rampart above the grounds with two things in his pockets that he had carried all autumn without fully understanding why. One was his father's cloak, the old invisibility cloak that had come to him in his first year, that Dumbledore had told him weeks ago in a voice gone strange was older than any cloak had a right to be. The other was the dead ring, the gold gone cold, the cracked black stone still set in it, the thing the ruined house had almost used to catch him. He took the ring out and turned it in the gray light and looked at the stone and understood now at the end what the three of them were, because Dumbledore had told him the old tale at last: three brothers and a road at dusk and a robed figure that was death pretending to be cheated, a wand that could not be beaten, a stone that called the dead to the edge, a cloak that hid a man even from the eye of the shore, the Hallows. The three gifts, the story said, would make their holder the master of death. He almost laughed, and the muscles for it were far away, but the bleak wonder in it was real. He had a cloak in one pocket and a stone in the other, and he could have gone hunting the wand, and the story would have called that mastery. But he had learned the truth of it in a ruined house on a hill, in a cave under a cliff, in a taproom in the West, and the truth was that the story had it backward, as the living always had it backward about death. The stone did not master death. It was a lure, a way of refusing to let go, the exact trap that had almost taken him over the box. The wand did not master death. It was only a better way of killing, and killing had never once been the same thing as mastery. And the cloak, the humble cloak, the one gift the greedy brother had not wanted, was the one the old tale said let its holder greet death at last as an equal and a friend, not by hiding from it but by living a full life, and then, when the hour came, setting the cloak aside and walking out to meet the shore of one's own accord. That was the real mastery, not the wand, not the stone, not the hiding, the walking out freely when it was time. He had done it once already in a courtyard he had not yet reached, in an hour that had not yet come, and he would do it again for good some day down his cold road, and that, and not the three gifts, was what made him what the story had never understood how to name. He set the ring on the cold stone of the rampart and did not put it back in his pocket. He would not need it. He was going to see them all for real within the hour on the shore, and if he came back he would not drag them to any doorway, and if he did not come back he would be with them, and either way the stone had nothing left to offer him that he could not get more honestly. He left it there on the rampart, gold and cracked black stone, a lure with nothing left to lure, and he kept the cloak because the cloak was his father's, and because the cloak was the one of the three that had ever told the truth. Then the light changed at the edge of the grounds, and the far boundary of the school lit with the first curses of the assault, and Harry's hour arrived. The attack came at midday, and it came like the end of the world. Voldemort brought everything. He had spent 50 years gathering a kingdom, and now that the kingdom was cracking under him, he threw the whole weight of it at the walls of the school, giants and the masked and the cursed dead and the things that live in the dark places in answer to fear. And the defenders of the castle met them at the boundary, and the boundary held, and then bent, and then broke in places, and the grounds became a country of running light and falling stone. Harry moved through it toward the center of it, toward the pool he could feel gathering there, the last cold star in all the world, the raw remaining trunk of Tom Riddle come at last out of hiding to reclaim the anchor he did not know he was walking toward giving up. Harry did not fight the things that crossed his path. He walked through the battle as he had walked through the taproom unhurried, and the curses that found him broke against the shore and did nothing. And the masked figures who turned to strike him fell back from the deep places in his face, and the word went ahead of him through both armies: the one who cannot be touched is walking toward the Dark Lord, and the battle seemed to curve away from him as he passed, both sides parting before a thing neither of them had a name for. He passed the defenders on his way in, and he made himself look at them, because they were the room he had bought and he owed them the looking. Neville Longbottom stood in the mouth of a shattered cloister with blood on his face, and his grandfather's wand in a grip that would not open, holding a line that 3 larger boys had already fallen from, and he did not step back because Neville had never in his life learned the sensible trick of stepping back. And as Harry passed, he caught Harry's eye and did not ask where he was going or why the curses would not touch him. He only nodded once, the nod of one soldier to another on a bad morning, and went on holding his impossible line, and Harry carried that nod with him into the smoke like a coal in a cold hand. Professor McGonagall was on the stairs, tartan and terrible, turning suits of armor loose down the corridors with a flick of a wrist and a face like the last stand of a whole civilization. And she saw Harry, and something in her going still told him she understood more than the others did, that she had watched him walk toward deaths before and had learned to read the set of a person who does not expect to walk back, and she did not call out to him. She only lifted her wand in something that was half a salute and half a blessing, and turned back to the holding of the school. He passed a first year crouched behind a fallen statue with a wand too big for her hand and terror too big for her body, and she looked up at him as he went by, and he had nothing to give her but the truth, and so he gave it. "It's almost over," he said. "Hold on, it's almost over," and he went on toward the center, and behind him the whole doomed brave architecture of the living held its ground 1 minute longer, and one more buying him with their bodies the walk he was about to take, and he did not waste a step of it. He found Voldemort in the ruin of the courtyard, where the great flagstones had been thrown up and the fountain shattered and the noon light came down through smoke, and the white man stood in the center of it with his wand in his hand and his eyes on the doors waiting because he had felt Harry coming the way Harry had felt him, 2 needles that hated each other closing the last of the distance. "There you are," Voldemort said. He had stopped pretending at contempt somewhere in the last 11 days. There was only the cornered thing now, formidable to the very end, dangerous the way anything is dangerous when it has understood it is going to die and decided to make the dying expensive. "I have taken your school, I have broken your defenders, and now you have walked out to me alone, which tells me that whatever rides you has finally miscalculated because there is no cleverness left to it, no trap, no clever reaching hand. There is only you and me and the one spell in the world, and this time there is no snake to reach for, no crown, no cup. There is only your death, and I am going to give it to you in front of your broken school and take back what is mine and begin again." "I know," Harry said. "I came so you could. That's the part you still don't understand right at the end, and it's the same thing you never understood at the beginning. You think my death is your victory. It's the last door I need opened, and you're the only one with the key, and you're going to use it because you can't imagine not using it, because using it is the only thing you've ever known how to do." He spread his empty hands. He did not raise a wand. He stood in the smoke and the noon light in the ruin of the courtyard, and he looked at the white man across the broken stones, and there was no hatred in it, and no fear and no triumph, only the flat truth of the tide. "Go on, Tom, open the door. I'll see you on the other side of it, and I promise you, you are not going to like what's waiting there because it's been waiting for you for 15 years, and it is very, very patient." Voldemort raised the wand, and there was a flicker at the last, under the red of his eyes, of the small child in the orphanage cot who had felt the cold and sworn to escape it. And then he spoke the words he had spoken more than any other words in his long refusal, and the green light crossed the courtyard. Harry opened the door and let it in. He did not break it this time. He did the hardest thing the Mark had ever asked of him, which was to not defend, to stand still and open the shore all the way inside his own chest, and let the curse do the one thing it had never once managed against him, which was to land. The green light struck him full over the heart, and this time the shore did not throw it back, because Harry did not want it thrown back, because he had chosen the crossing, and the curse went into him and found the door standing wide, in the courtyard, in the smoke, in the noon light, and the whole loud dying world went out all at once like a snuffed lamp. And Harry stood on the shore. He knew it at once, and he knew also that it was different from every other time, because every other time he had been a visitor, a marked hand reaching in from the far side, and this time he was all the way here, both feet on the endless murmuring dark, the cold tide over his ankles, no cord running back to a body in a courtyard, nothing pulling him toward the light of a world he had left. He was here. He had come at last all the way down, the thing every living creature does exactly once, and he found that it was not terrible, that the shore had never once been terrible, that it was only quiet and vast and patient and clean. And the peace of Tom Riddle came out of him. He felt it go. It had lived behind his scar since before he could speak, curled small and cold, a lodger he had mistaken for a native, and now that Harry stood whole and undefended on the shore itself, the splinter had nowhere left to hide and no anchor left to hold to, and the tide reached up and drew it out of the deep of him, and it came thrashing, screaming, the last coherent piece of the man in the courtyard, and it fought the shore the way all of them had fought, and it lost the way all of them had lost. And the tide closed over it, and it was unmade, given the death it had cheated 15 years before, gathered, closed over, gone. And Harry stood on the shore with the last of his lodger drawn out of him and understood that he was, for the first time since a curse rebounded in a cottage, only himself, only Harry. No cold curled behind the scar, no murmur of another self under his thoughts. Whole. Alone in his own skull as he had never once been in all his remembered life, and lighter for it, so much lighter that he understood how much of the weight he had carried had never been his at all. The figure was there on the shore, tall past comfort, folded in its wing dark. "It is done," Death said. "The seventh door is shut." There is nothing of Tom Riddle anchored anywhere in the living world now, save the raw trunk of him standing in your courtyard in a body he can no longer flee, mortal at last, wholly mortal, a man who spent his soul to buy an immortality that has just been taken back to the last coin. He is finishable. And you are here whole, mine and your own, and the choice I promised you is in front of you, and I will not make it for you, and I cannot promise you the outcome, and it is yours. The pale hands opened, palms up, offering nothing and everything as they had on the first night a lifetime and a season ago. "You may stay, there is no shame in the staying. Your godfather is here, and your mother and your father, and the rest that you were cheated of your whole life is here, and it is real, and it is deep, and it is deserved, and if you walk into it now, no one who loves you will ever be able to say you did not earn it 100 times over. Or you may go back. Back into a body in a courtyard, back into a war half lost, back into a life in which you will never again feel the warmth of a room or the taste of a meal or the wonder of a spell, in which you will walk between mine and part, marked forever, remembered by me, and never quite at home among your own kind. That is what waits for you if you go back. I will not dress it in kindness. It is a cold road and a lonely one, and it does not end, it only goes on for as long as you choose to walk it. Stay and be warm and be at rest, or go and be the hand that finishes the work and pay for the rest of your days the price of having been chosen. Choose, I am listening." Harry stood on the shore, and the murmur pooled around his feet, and out of the multitude one voice rose clear of the rest, warm and rough and whole, a bark of laughter in a kitchen, the sound the ring had taken and posted ahead of him, and it was here exactly as Death had promised, the first thing he heard: Sirius. And behind Sirius, two more, a man and a woman he had spent his whole life reaching for, close now, close enough to speak to, and the rest that he had been cheated of, standing patient at the edge of the world, real and deep and deserved and offered. He wanted it. He let himself want it on the shore for one whole clean moment because he had earned the wanting. He wanted the warm kitchen and the laugh he could hear again and the arms of the parents he had never known and the setting down of the whole cold, impossible weight. He wanted to stay, and that was how he knew he had to go. "Not yet," Harry said, to the shore, to the warm crowd of the dead, to the parents he could feel standing close. His voice was not steady, and he let it not be steady because there was no one here whose opinion of his steadiness could matter, and because this was the beat, the one that cost everything. "I can hear you. I can hear all of you, and you're real, and it's the only thing I've wanted since I was small, and I'm going to have it. I promise you I'm going to have it, but not today. Today there's a man in a courtyard with a body he can't flee and 100 people fighting and dying to keep him off a school full of children, and I'm the only hand in the world that can close the last door. And if I stay here to be warm while that door hangs open, then I bought all of this, all these cold months, all these stolen warmths for nothing. So I'm going back. I'm going to go and finish it. And then I'm going to walk whatever cold road is left to me, however long it is, and do whatever the mark asks of me for as long as it asks, and when I'm finally done, when it's really and truly done and there's no door left anywhere that needs my hand." His voice did break then once, and he let it, "Then I'll come back down here on my own road, and I'll stay, and you'll still be here because you're at rest, and rest doesn't run out. Wait for me. You've got all the time there is. Wait for me, and I'll bring you the whole story, and we'll have the warm kitchen then forever, and I won't have bought it for nothing. Wait for me." The warm crowd of the dead did not argue. They were at rest, and the at rest do not clutch. The laugh rang once more, clear and whole and unafraid, and the two who stood close drew back, not wrenched away, not lost, only allowed to wait where they had been waiting, and Harry felt, for the length of a breath, a thing that was not warmth because warmth had gone down to the shore in installments, but that stood exactly where warmth would stand, the blessing of the dead on the living who is not yet ready to join them. "Go then," Death said, and there was in the vast cold voice the nearest it had ever come in the whole age of the world to pride. "Go back, chosen one, and finish the thing you were marked for, and walk your cold road, and come to me at the end of it of your own accord, and I will keep the water, and I will keep the kitchen, and I will keep the laugh, all of it safe until your hour. You have chosen the hardest thing a soul can choose, which is to leave the shore when the shore is open and the arms are out and the rest is deserved. No one who has not stood where you are standing will ever understand what it costs. I understand. I have watched the whole age of the world, and I have seen it chosen exactly as often as I have chosen a hand, which is to say almost never, and I do not forget the ones who choose it. Go, your body is waiting. Wake up and stand up and unmake him and let the world exhale." Harry woke. He was on his back on the broken flagstones of the courtyard, and the noon light came down through the smoke, and over him stood Lord Voldemort, wand still raised, red eyes fixed on the young man he believed he had just killed. And behind the red eyes was the thing that had followed him his whole refusal, the not daring to believe, the fear that even now, even with Potter struck down at his feet, it had not truly taken, that nothing ever truly took. And Harry opened his eyes and looked up at the white man and stood. He stood the way the mark had taught him to stand, a vessel that is full rather than a body that falls, and he came up off the broken stones whole and undefended and holy, finally Death's, no splinter behind his scar, no cord running anywhere but down to the shore that came in and in against the inside of his hands. And Lord Voldemort looked at the young man he had killed rising unhurt from the flagstones for the second time in a life, and the last of the certainty went out of the red eyes. And what was left was only the cold, small child in the orphanage cot, 60 years and 8 torn pieces of soul away, meeting at the very end the one thing all the tearing had been meant to escape. "You should not have opened the door," Harry said. He did not raise a wand. He raised his hand, the marked one empty open, and he did not cross the courtyard, because there was no longer any need to close the distance. The last star was standing in front of him, mortal, anchorless, finishable, and the shore had come all the way up into Harry now and did not need him to reach. "That was the last thing keeping you in the world, Tom, the piece of you in me. You spent it killing me, and it went down to the shore where all the others went, and now there's nothing holding your door open anywhere. You're just a man. You've been just a man for about a minute, and you can already feel it, can't you? The cold you spent everything to never feel again, coming up through the floor. There's nothing left to do now but the thing you've been running from since you were 11 years old in a cave by the sea." His open hand did not waver. "I'm not going to kill you. Killing you is always the small thing, the thing that never worked. I'm going to do the thing that does. I'm going to unmake you. Every piece, every anchor, every stolen breath you ever refused to pay for, drawn home to the shore, closed over, gone, until the wound you tore in the order of the world reads at the last as if it had never been torn, not defeated, undone, now hold still. It's finally over, and you've earned every second of the end of it, and it is going to be very, very quiet." And Harry called the last of Tom Riddle home. The shore opened, not through a locket or a cup or a crown, not through a serpent's head or a splinter behind a scar, but all the way wide through the hole of the hand and the hole of the one who had died and chosen to come back, and the courtyard went thin, a painted screen with the tide pressing behind it, and the tide came up. It came up out of the depth beneath Harry, and it reached across the broken flagstones for the last cold star, the raw remaining trunk of the man who had spent his soul to cheat it, and Lord Voldemort felt the shore take hold of him at last, felt the cold that has never once been warm close around the whole of him, and he fought. Of course he fought. He had fought it his whole existence. It was the only thing he had ever truly done, and he fought it now with everything that was left, the wand, the words, the will that had bent a country to its shape, and none of it caught because there was nothing left to catch, with no anchor, no piece hidden anywhere in the world, no coat to flee into, only a man, a single mortal man standing in a courtyard, while the oldest thing in the world reached up through a boy's open hand and drew him, screaming, down. He came apart the way a debt comes apart when it is finally wholly paid, not torn, not burned, unmade. The tide drew him out of the world thread by thread. The white body and the red eyes and the 50 years of terror and the 60 years of refusal, all of it down to the shore, and as it went the wound he had torn in the order of things drew close behind it, healed over clean, so that where there had been a splinter driven under the skin of the living world for 15 years there was now only smooth, unbroken cloth, only the world as it was meant to be. Only a place where a great darkness had been and was, suddenly and completely not. The last star went out. The smoke hung in the noon light over an empty courtyard, and the sound of the battle beyond the walls faltered and changed and began, without anyone yet understanding why, to become the sound of an ending. And high above, in the smear where a dead diary's fragment had hung unclaimed and denied the shore for 4 long years, the last smoke of him settled at last, like silt when the river finally stops, and went down into the tide with the rest, and the account, the whole terrible account, closed. Harry stood alone in the empty courtyard with his hand still open and the shore receding slowly back down into the deep of him, and the smoke thinning, and the noon light coming clean and gold through the settling dust. He was whole, he was alone in his own skull. He was, from this day and forever, only himself and death's walking between, marked, remembered by the oldest thing in the world, and never quite again at home in a lit room among his own kind. He had paid the whole of the price in installments across a cold season and in a single crossing at the end, and he had bought with it a world that no longer had Tom Riddle anywhere in it. Not in a vault or a cave or snake or scar, not even now, quite in its memory, because the wound had closed so clean that already out beyond the walls, the survivors were finding it hard to hold the shape of the terror they had lived under, the name growing slippery, the fear losing its grip. The whole long nightmare beginning, mercifully, to fade the way a nightmare fades in the first gold minute of a morning. He alone would remember all of it. That was the last part of the price, the part death had not needed to name because Harry had understood it standing on the shore. Someone had to keep the true memory whole and undimmed of what had been done and what it had cost, so that it could never be done again unwitnessed. And the one who does the unmaking is the one who carries the memory forever, the single lit window in a world that is already gratefully forgetting. He would carry it. He would carry Sirius's laugh that he could no longer hear, and the burrow's warmth that he could no longer feel, and the wonder of a castle that was only stone to him now. And under all of it he would carry the true whole memory of the shore and the mandate and the 7 doors and the man who was undone. And he would walk his cold road with all of it, for as long as the walking asked, until his own hour came and he went down to the water of his own accord to the warm kitchen that was waiting. They came into the courtyard then, the living, out of the guttering battle, Ron first and Hermione a step behind him. And they stopped at the edge of the settling smoke and looked at Harry standing alone in the gold light with his hand still open and the deep places showing in his face. And they did not understand what they were looking at, and they came to him anyway because that was the whole of what they were. And Hermione crossed the broken stones and stood in front of him and looked up into the changed face of her oldest friend, and she did not ask him the thing, and she did not ask him her one saved question either, because she could see looking at him that the answer to it was both yes and something colder than yes, that he had come back and that not all of him had, and she did the only thing there was to do, which was to reach up and put her hand flat against his chest. over the place where the curse had struck and the door had opened, and feel under her palm the ordinary living beat of a heart that had gone all the way down to the shore and chosen, for their sake, to climb back up. "You came back," she said. "I came back," Harry said. He could not feel the warmth of her hand. He could feel the pressure of it, and the pressure said she was there, and there was still, after everything, enough. He put his own hand over hers on his chest, in the gold and settling light of the courtyard where the last darkness in the world had just been drawn down into the patient tide and closed over and unmade, and he held her hand there against the beat of the heart he had brought back up out of the deep. And he began quietly in the first minute of a world that was already forgetting the shape of its long fear, the cold and endless and freely chosen work of remembering it for them all. Chapter 7 End.